A storm gathers over the quiet hills of the Cotswolds, and inside Ashbourne Manor, a young woman stands before her fate. Dorothea Hollis has been sold, not for love, but to pay her father's debt. Her new husband, the reclusive and blind Marquis Leonard Ashbourne, lives hidden from the world, his heart as shuttered as his home. But on that first night, when her trembling voice breaks the silence, something begins to stir between them, something dangerous, forbidden, and destined to change everything. A secret will be revealed. A heart will learn to see. If you love dramatic historical romances filled with emotion, suspense, and impossible choices, subscribe now and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support keeps these stories alive. The Cotswolds, England, 1813. Dorothea Hollis had always believed that a home could be held together by small decencies, a clean hearth, a mended hem, a loaf of bread cut evenly so no one felt less loved than the other. She learned, on a damp morning that smelled of wet stone and coal smoke, that a home could also be undone by a single vice that never slept. Her father's boots tracked mud across the entry rug as if the earth itself had come in to claim them. He did not remove his coat. He did not greet her properly. He simply stood near the window, staring at the pale blur of cottages outside, as though the village might open up and swallow him. Dorothea set down the basket of linens she had been folding. Her fingers remained on the cloth, pressed flat, as if holding the fabric could keep the room from shifting beneath her feet. "Father," she said gently, "has something happened?" He swallowed. His throat moved like it hurt. "Get your cloak," he murmured. "We must go into town." Dorothea's heart tightened. The Hollis family did not visit town together unless it was Sunday service, a christening or a funeral. Her father's tone carried none of the solemn steadiness of church and none of the dignity of grief. It carried something worse: urgency, shame. She did not ask again. She lifted her plain wool cloak from the peg, tied it beneath her chin, and followed him into the narrow street, where the air was cold enough to sting, and the sky hung low like unspun wool. As they walked, Dorothea noticed how her father kept his eyes down, as if the cobblestones were safer than faces. Two women at a doorway paused their conversation when he passed. A man unloading crates glanced up, then looked away too quickly. Dorothea felt it like a hand pressing between her shoulder blades, urging her forward. "Father," she tried softly, "is it Mr. Tiller again? If he waits until the end of the week, I can—" "Do not," he cut in too sharp, then softened with a ragged breath. "Do not offer what you cannot give." Dorothea's cheeks warmed, not with anger, but with humiliation at her own helplessness. She had been stretching pennies and patience for months, pretending the tension in their home was only a passing cloud. She had heard him moving at night, heard the restless pacing, the opened drawer, the clink of coins counted and recounted as if by counting them enough times he might multiply them. They reached the solicitor's office at the edge of the market square, a building of dark wood and heavy glass that always looked as though it were holding its breath. The brass plaque by the door caught the dim light. Pembroke, solicitor. Dorothea's father hesitated, hand on the knob. Then he pushed in as if being dragged. Inside, the air smelled of ink, dust, and the faint sourness of worry. A clerk led them not to the front room, but to a smaller chamber in the back, where the curtains were drawn, and the table was already prepared with paper laid out like a verdict. Mr. Pembroke rose with practiced politeness. His hair was thinning, his eyes sharp and careful. He greeted Dorothea's father with a nod that held no warmth, then looked at Dorothea as if she were a detail on a document he intended to file away. "Miss Hollis," he said, "thank you for coming." Dorothea's father remained standing. He did not sit. Dorothea lowered herself into a chair, her spine straight, her hands folded. She kept her gaze on the solicitor's face because she had learned that fear grows larger when you look at the floor. Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat. "The matter has progressed beyond ordinary arrangements." Dorothea's father flinched as if struck. Dorothea's breath slowed. She listened, because she could feel the truth approaching, heavy and inevitable. "The creditor," Mr. Pembroke continued, "has grown impatient. The sum is no longer manageable through partial repayments. If the debt is not settled, he is prepared to pursue legal recourse." Dorothea's father's voice broke. "I have told you I will pay. I will. I only need time." "Time," the solicitor echoed, as if tasting the word and finding it worthless, "is a luxury, Mr. Hollis, that you have exhausted." Dorothea's hands tightened in her lap. She could not bear to look at her father's face. It would unmake her. She kept her eyes on the solicitor instead, because anger was easier than pity. "There is," Mr. Pembroke said, "an alternative." Dorothea's father stared at him, hope and terror mixing into something desperate. "What alternative?" Mr. Pembroke's gaze shifted back to Dorothea, slow and deliberate. "A marriage." The room seemed to tilt. Dorothea felt as if someone had opened a window in her chest, letting cold air flood in. Her fingers went numb. "A marriage," her father repeated, the words barely forming. Dorothea found her voice thin but steady. "To whom?" Mr. Pembroke leaned forward. "Leonard Ashbourne, Marquis of Ashbourne." Dorothea had heard the name, of course. Everyone in the county had. It carried old wealth, wide lands, and the kind of authority that made doors open quietly. But it also carried whispers now, because tragedy always becomes entertainment in small towns. "The Marquis," Dorothea began, "is blind," Mr. Pembroke finished, as if that were a simple fact like weather, "and has lived in seclusion at Ashbourne Manor since his accident." Her father's hands trembled at his sides. "Why would a Marquis want a discreet arrangement?" the solicitor said smoothly, "one that protects him from certain pressures and protects your family from ruin." Dorothea's lips parted, but no sound came at first. The insult was too large to fit into speech. "A discreet arrangement," she repeated finally, the words tasting of iron. "Do you mean I would be purchased?" Her father's head snapped toward her. "Dora, answer," Dorothea said, not loudly, but with a firmness that startled even her. She looked at Mr. Pembroke, and her eyes did not move away. "Answer me." Mr. Pembroke's expression did not change. "The Marquis would settle the debt in full. In exchange, you would become his wife. The marriage would be legally recognized. You would be housed, protected, and provided for." Dorothea's throat tightened. "Wife." The word should have held warmth, promise, tenderness. Here it sounded like a cage lined with velvet. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Silence thickened. Even the clock seemed to hold its tick. Mr. Pembroke spoke as if reciting an inevitable conclusion. Then the creditor proceeds. "Your father faces public disgrace. Your family loses its standing. Your home may be seized. Your siblings' prospects are damaged." Dorothea turned her head slightly and saw her father's face at last. The man who used to lift her onto his shoulders at fairs, who once spoke with pride in his voice, looked shrunken, hollow. A man drowning, eyes begging for a rope. Dorothea's anger faltered, not because he deserved mercy, but because she could not bear to watch her family be crushed for his weakness. Her father's voice came out hoarse. "Dorothea, I swear I did not mean... I thought I could win it back. I thought—" She raised a hand, not to silence him harshly, but because his shame was pouring into the room like smoke, choking her. "Do not," she said softly. "Not here." Mr. Pembroke slid a paper across the table. Dorothea did not touch it. The very sight of ink on parchment felt like chains. "You may take a day," the solicitor said, "but not longer." Dorothea rose on unsteady legs. Her father reached as if to grasp her sleeve, then stopped, his fingers curling into a fist of helplessness. Outside, the market square bustled, as if nothing in Dorothea's world had just ended. Someone laughed near a produce stall. A child ran past with a ribbon in her hair. The normalcy of it made Dorothea want to cry, but she did not. Tears would come later, in the privacy of darkness where no one could see her break. They walked home in silence. Her father's shoulders were hunched, as if he expected stones to be thrown. At their cottage, Dorothea went straight to the small back room that was hers. She shut the door, pressed her forehead against it, and breathed until the shaking in her hands softened. The first tears did not fall dramatically. They came quietly, hot and humiliating, sliding down her cheeks, as if her body was trying to rid itself of poison. She had always known life could be unfair. She had seen it in neighbors buried too young, in children who went hungry through winters, in women who smiled while carrying burdens that would have crushed men. But this was different. This was not hardship. This was a transaction. She wiped her face, stood and looked at herself in the small mirror. Her eyes were red, but there was steel beneath the softness. Dorothea Hollis had not been raised to collapse. When she returned to the front room, her father was sitting by the hearth with his head in his hands, as if he might pry his own thoughts apart. He looked up as she entered, and Dorothea saw the boyish cowardice in his expression, the part of him that wanted her to fix what he had ruined. "Dora," he whispered, "you don't have to—" "Yes," she said, startling him with the certainty. "I do." His face crumpled. "I never wanted this for you." Dorothea's voice sharpened, not cruelly, but with truth. "Then you should not have gambled with my life." He flinched as if slapped, and she felt the sting of her own words. Not because they were wrong, but because she had loved him once without question. She turned away before her softness betrayed her. "Tell Mr. Pembroke I accept." Her father lurched to his feet. "Dorothea!" She faced him again, and the steadiness in her eyes made him fall silent. "I will not watch our family dragged into ruin," she said. "I will not watch Mother's memory be mocked by creditors at our door. I will not watch my siblings learn that dignity is a thing that can be taken." Her father's mouth trembled. "He's blind," he murmured, as if that detail could somehow soften the horror. "They say he's bitter." Dorothea's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "Then we will both be bitter, won't we? And perhaps that will make us equal." The day that followed passed like a dream she could not wake from. Dorothea moved through tasks with mechanical precision, folding linens, washing dishes, answering her siblings' questions with careful half-truths. She told them she would be away for some time. She did not tell them she was being sold. Some truths were too heavy to place in young hands. That evening, as dusk turned the Cotswold hills into shadow, Dorothea packed a small trunk. She chose practical dresses, modest and plain. She folded her best muslin gown last, the one she wore to church on holy days. Her fingers lingered on the fabric, not because it was fine, but because it was hers. It belonged to her life, the life that had just been taken. Before bed she stepped outside. The air smelled of damp earth and distant smoke. Somewhere, a sheep bleated. The village lay quiet, unaware that one of its daughters was about to vanish into a manor house like a swallowed secret. Dorothea lifted her face to the sky and forced herself to breathe deeply. "You will not break me," she whispered into the cold. The next morning, a carriage arrived. It was not grand in the way of royal processions, but it was polished, well-kept, unmistakably aristocratic. The driver wore livery. The horses were strong and restless, stamping as if eager to leave this small place behind. Dorothea's father stood by the door, pale and shaking. He tried to speak, but the words failed him. Dorothea touched his arm once, a gesture that was almost kindness, almost farewell. "Take care of them," she said softly, meaning her siblings more than him. Then she climbed into the carriage. As it rolled away, Dorothea watched the cottage shrink in the window. She did not wave. She did not look back after the first curve of the road. She refused to give the past the satisfaction of seeing her beg. The countryside unfolded like a painting meant to comfort, all green slopes and stone cottages, the color of honey. But Dorothea could not be comforted. Beauty felt almost cruel when you were walking toward a fate you had not chosen. Hours later, the landscape shifted into wider fields, older trees, thicker hedges. The road narrowed, the air grew cooler. The carriage wheels sounded louder, as if the world were quieting itself for what awaited. Then, at last, iron gates appeared. Ashbourne Manor rose beyond them, vast and solemn, built of stone that looked older than regret. The windows were tall, many of them dim. The gardens were trimmed but restrained, as if the estate had learned to survive without joy. The carriage passed through the gates. Dorothea's pulse hammered. A servant opened the door and offered a hand. Dorothea took it, stepping down onto gravel that crunched like a warning. She held her chin high, because fear would only feed the wolves of rumour. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of beeswax and old wood. It was warm, yet it felt cold in its stillness. Servants moved quietly, eyes lowered. A house could be grand and still feel like it was morning. Mrs. Teasdale, the housekeeper, greeted Dorothea with a stiff nod. "Miss Hollis," she said. The title sounded like something already fading. "This way," she continued, and led Dorothea through corridors lined with portraits. Men in tailored coats stared down from gilded frames, their painted eyes sharp with privilege. Women in pale gowns looked distant, their expressions perfect and untouchable. Dorothea's steps slowed as they neared a door at the end of the corridor. Something about the air changed there. It felt heavier, as if the house itself held its breath. Mrs. Teasdale paused. "His lordship will receive you." Dorothea's fingers curled around the strap of her reticule. "Is he expecting me?" The housekeeper's mouth tightened. "He is aware you are here." That was not the same as expecting. The door opened, and Dorothea entered. The drawing room was dim, the curtains drawn against the pale afternoon light. A fire burned low, casting warm flickers across dark furniture. It smelled of smoke and leather, and something faintly medicinal. Near the hearth stood a man. He was taller than Dorothea had imagined, his posture rigid as if carved from discipline. He wore a charcoal coat, a white high-collared shirt, a neatly tied cravat that spoke of habits maintained even in despair. His hair was dark, brushed back with care. His face, though, was the true shock. Not because it was unhandsome, but because it carried a quiet severity that made the room feel smaller. A strong jaw, a mouth held in restraint, and eyes that did not focus on her, yet still seemed to pierce through her, as if he could sense every trembling secret. Dorothea's breath caught. He turned his head slightly, as if tracking the sound of her step. His voice, when he spoke, was low and controlled, carrying authority even in darkness. "So," he said, "you have arrived." Dorothea forced her lungs to work. She stepped forward, stopping a respectful distance away. "Yes, my lord." A pause, thin as a knife. He tilted his head, as if listening not just to her words, but to the truth beneath them. "Tell me your name," he said quietly. Dorothea's throat tightened. He had been told it, surely. Yet he asked as if the name mattered more when spoken by her. "Dorothea Hollis," she answered. The Marquis's expression did not change, but something in his stillness sharpened. "Dorothea," he repeated slowly as if testing the sound. Then, with a faint edge of irony, "A beautiful name for an arrangement that is anything but." Dorothea's cheeks warmed, her fingers trembled, and she hated them for it. "My lord," she began, but her courage stumbled under the weight of the moment. This man had not asked for tenderness. She had not come here to pretend she belonged in his world. Yet something in his voice, the quiet bitterness, stirred an unexpected ache in her chest. He took a step forward, not toward her body but toward her presence, as if he needed to confirm the space she occupied. Dorothea did not move. She felt the heat of the fire behind him, the cool hush of the manor around them, and the strange pull of his attention, unseen but unmistakable. "You understand," he said, voice calm, "that I will not be managed." Dorothea lifted her chin. "Yes, my lord. You will not speak of this arrangement outside these walls. Yes, you will not offer me pity." Dorothea's breath steadied. This she could give. "I would not insult you with it." For the first time, the faintest crack appeared in his composure. Not a smile, not softness, but a subtle shift, like a man surprised to find steel where he expected submission. He turned his face slightly toward her voice again. "And what will you offer, then, Mrs. Ashbourne in waiting?" The question was cruel in its honesty. Dorothea's heart beat hard enough to hurt. She could have answered with obedience. She could have answered with fear. Instead, she spoke the truth that rose like fire in her chest. "I will offer dignity," she said softly. "Mine and yours." Silence fell. The Marquis's jaw tightened, as if holding back something dangerous. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost tired. "You are brave," he said, not as praise, but as an observation that sounded like a warning. "Bravery can be costly here." Dorothea swallowed. She felt in that moment the shape of the life she had entered. A house full of silence, a man full of pride and pain, a marriage built on a bargain. And yet, standing before him, Dorothea sensed something else too. Not hope, not yet, but the faintest spark of possibility, fragile as a candle in a draught. She did not know why it stirred in her, and she did not trust it. But when the Marquis shifted his hand slightly, as if unsure where the air ended and she began, Dorothea held her breath, watching his fingers hover in the space between them. He did not touch her. He only said, in a voice that sounded like a door closing gently, "Mrs. Teasdale will show you to your rooms. The wedding will take place soon." Dorothea lowered her gaze, but not in surrender, in composure. "Yes, my lord." As she turned to leave, she felt his attention follow her, unseen and heavy, as if he had marked her not by her face, but by something deeper he could not name. And Dorothea, stepping back into the corridor lined with portraits, realized with a chill that she had not simply entered Ashbourne Manor. She had entered the darkness of another life, and the man inside it had already begun to listen for the sound of her heart. The morning of Dorothea Hollis's wedding dawned grey and hesitant, as if even the sun was reluctant to bear witness. Mist hung over the Cotswold hills, softening the outlines of trees and cottages into a watercolour dream. The chill in the air slipped beneath her cloak as she stepped out of her chamber, guided by Mrs. Teasdale's measured footsteps echoing down the corridor. The manor was silent, its grandeur subdued beneath the weight of something solemn and secret. Candles flickered in silver sconces along the walls, their faint light touching the portraits of long-dead Ashbournes who seemed to observe her with disapproval. Dorothea's footsteps sounded too loud on the polished floor. She wished, absurdly, that her heart would beat more quietly. Her gown was simple, cream muslin trimmed with narrow lace, high-waisted and long-sleeved, the kind of dress a woman might wear to morning service rather than to the altar. The modest cut had been chosen deliberately, as if to disguise the scandal of how this union had come to be. A narrow ribbon circled her waist, pale blue, the only detail of softness she had allowed herself. When she reached the front hall, the housekeeper adjusted Dorothea's shawl with brisk care, not tenderness. "The carriage is ready," Mrs. Teasdale said. "His lordship will meet you at the church." Dorothea nodded, her throat too tight for speech. She could feel the pulse of the house behind her, steady and watchful, like a living creature withholding judgment. The carriage door closed with a hollow sound. As it rolled through the village, Dorothea watched the mist cling to the hedgerows and the stone cottages with their ivy-covered walls. A few villagers glanced up from their work as the horses passed, but no one waved. Word had travelled fast. They knew. At the top of a hill, the old parish church appeared through the fog, small, ancient, built of the same golden stone as the cottages. Its bell had not been rung for her. The silence felt almost deliberate. The air smelled faintly of damp moss and candle wax when she stepped out of the carriage. Inside, the nave was lit by a handful of candles. No flowers decorated the aisle, no music filled the space, only the soft echo of their footsteps on worn stone. At the front waited the rector, a kindly man with weathered hands, and beside him the Marquis of Ashbourne. Dorothea's breath caught before she could stop it. Leonard stood straight despite his blindness, his dark coat perfectly cut, his cravat tied with military precision. The light from the high window fell across his face, tracing the fine angles of his cheekbones and jaw. His expression was calm, but beneath the calm she sensed something unyielding, like a sword hidden beneath velvet. He turned his head slightly when the door opened, as if attuned to the sound of her steps. Dorothea's heart stumbled. He could not see her, yet she felt seen all the same. Mrs. Teasdale guided her forward. Dorothea moved slowly down the aisle, each step an act of courage. The rector's voice began the ceremony, soft and solemn, echoing faintly against the stone walls. Dorothea could hardly hear her own responses. The words blurred into sound, obedience, loyalty, forever, each one heavier than the last. When the moment came to take his hand, she hesitated only for a breath. Leonard's gloved fingers brushed hers, cool and steady. The touch was brief, almost impersonal, yet it sent a tremor through her. His grasp was neither cruel nor tender. It was measured, as if control itself were his only defense. "I, Leonard, take thee, Dorothea," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could truly hear it. "To be my lawful wife." There was no hesitation, no emotion, only precision. When her turn came, Dorothea's voice faltered once, then steadied. "I, Dorothea, take thee, Leonard, to be my lawful husband." The words left her mouth like smoke, insubstantial, but final. The rector concluded the vows, and the silence that followed was profound. It was the kind of silence that happens after something irreversible. The ceremony ended in minutes. No music marked their exit. No family waited outside. Only the mist, curling through the churchyard like a shroud. The carriage ride back to Ashbourne Manor passed in near silence. Leonard sat opposite her, one hand resting on the head of his cane. He did not wear dark glasses as some blind men did. Instead, his gaze remained fixed slightly ahead, unfocused yet powerful. Dorothea stole glances at him when the road curved and the lantern light caught his face. She wanted to ask something, anything, to bridge the distance between them. But what could she say to a man who had not chosen her freely? It was Leonard who broke the silence first. "You are quiet," he said. His tone was not unkind, only observant. Dorothea looked out the window, watching the shapes of trees blur in the mist. "There was little to say, my lord." A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "You speak the truth plainly. That may unsettle this household more than you expect." "I have no skill in pretense," she admitted. "It serves no one." He inclined his head slightly. "Then you and I may yet endure each other." Dorothea's pulse quickened, though she could not tell if his words were warning or compliment. When they reached the manor, the servants stood lined along the entrance hall, waiting in uneasy silence. Leonard dismissed them with a brief nod. "You may retire." His command left no room for ceremony. Dorothea followed him through the dim corridor to a parlour where a single fire burned. He gestured toward a chair near the hearth. "Sit," he said. She obeyed, her gloved hands clasped in her lap. He remained standing for a moment, facing the fire as though he could see its warmth. "You may find this arrangement difficult," he said finally. "I do not entertain guests. I do not dine publicly. I require little conversation." Dorothea looked up, startled by his starkness. "You speak as though you mean to warn me, my lord." "Perhaps I do," he said. "You will find life at Ashbourne quiet. I prefer it so. And if I do not?" Leonard turned his head toward her voice. "Then you will learn." His bluntness struck like frost. Dorothea drew a steadying breath, determined not to be intimidated. "I will adapt," she said softly. "I always have." He tilted his head slightly, as though the words intrigued him. "You have spirit," he murmured. "That can be troublesome in this house." She rose then, her composure fragile, but intact. "I do not mean to trouble anyone. I only wish to live honourably." Leonard's hand tightened around the head of his cane. "Honour is a delicate thing, Mrs. Ashbourne. It can be shattered by a whisper. You will find that silence protects it better than truth." Her heart gave a painful thud. "Then perhaps," she said quietly. "We shall be very safe indeed." For the first time he turned his face fully toward her, and though his eyes did not focus, the intensity in them made her feel exposed. "You mock me," he said. "No, my lord," she replied, meeting that unfocused gaze with calm strength. "I simply understand you." Something flickered in his expression, something dangerously close to admiration. "Mrs. Teasdale will show you to your rooms," he said finally, his voice softer now, but no less controlled. "The servants have been instructed to attend to your needs." Dorothea inclined her head. "Thank you, my lord." As she turned to go, he said quietly, "Dorothea." Her name in his mouth startled her. It was the first time he had spoken it since the ceremony, and hearing it transformed the air between them. "Yes?" He hesitated. For a moment it seemed he might say something human, something tender. Then he only said, "Do not pity me." Dorothea's lips parted. "I do not," she said, "but I think you pity yourself more than you should." The words escaped before she could stop them. The moment they left her lips, she feared she had gone too far. Leonard's head turned sharply, but his voice remained low. "You are bold." "Perhaps only honest," she answered. Silence stretched, taut and electric. Then, to her astonishment, he gave a faint sound that might have been the shadow of a laugh. "Honesty," he murmured, "is rarer in this house than sunlight. Keep it, if you can survive with it." She curtsied lightly, then left him standing by the fire. Upstairs, Mrs. Teasdale led her through a long corridor to a chamber overlooking the orchard. The room was large but sparsely adorned. A carved bed draped in ivory linen, a small writing desk, and a single vase of faded lavender. "This will be yours," the housekeeper said. Her tone was stiff, but her eyes lingered on Dorothea a moment longer than necessary, as though assessing something deeper than appearance. "His lordship values order. Meals are served precisely at the hour. He does not like disturbances." "I understand," Dorothea replied softly. When the door closed behind her, the quiet pressed in like a physical thing. Dorothea removed her gloves and laid them on the desk. Her hands trembled as she unpinned her bonnet. The reflection that stared back from the small mirror above the mantel did not look like a bride. It looked like a soldier after battle, still standing but unsure how. She crossed to the window and drew back the curtain. The orchard lay below, shrouded in fog. Bare branches reached toward the grey sky, stark and beautiful. Somewhere beyond them, the faint outline of a figure moved along the path. Perhaps Leonard, perhaps memory. A knock at the door startled her. "Enter," she called softly. Mrs. Teasdale reappeared, carrying a small tray with tea. "His lordship requests that you dine separately this evening," she said, setting it down. Dorothea nodded, unsurprised. "Of course." The housekeeper hesitated at the threshold. "You handled yourself well," she said quietly, almost against her will. "Few women would have kept their composure." Dorothea managed a faint smile. "I have had practice in pretending I'm brave." Mrs. Teasdale's expression softened for the first time. "Pretend long enough, and it becomes truth." She left without waiting for an answer. Dorothea sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and fade. The silence was immense, but not entirely empty. It held echoes. His voice, the sound of her name on his lips, the slight tremor she had felt in his touch. She closed her eyes. For a fleeting moment, she imagined what it would be like if this marriage were real, if the vows had been born of affection rather than necessity. The thought was dangerous, and yet it warmed her more than the fire. When she opened her eyes, the mist outside had thickened, wrapping the orchard in silver. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled the hour. Dorothea lifted her teacup, steady now, and whispered into the quiet room, "You may not want love, my lord, but I do not believe you are beyond it." Her words vanished into the stillness, unheard by anyone but the walls of Ashbourne Manor, and perhaps somewhere beyond them by the man who stood alone before the fire, wondering why his chest felt less hollow than it had that morning. Morning came to Ashbourne Manor wrapped in fog and silence. The air was cool and smelled faintly of wood smoke, lavender polish and damp earth. The servants moved quietly along the corridors, as if afraid to wake the memories sleeping in the walls. From her chamber window, Dorothea watched the mist rise slowly over the orchard, the branches glistening with dew like threads of silver. She felt both prisoner and guest, a woman bound by duty, yet drawn to the mystery of the man whose name she now bore. The day after the wedding had passed, like a dream half remembered. No celebration, no visitors, no flowers. The village bells had remained still, as though unwilling to mark a union forged not in love but necessity. Yet there had been something in Leonard Ashbourne's voice, a shadowed gentleness, a careful restraint that lingered with her. She had spent most of the previous evening thinking of it, unable to decide whether it was indifference or a sign of something still alive beneath his armor of silence. When Mrs. Teasdale entered with the breakfast tray, Dorothea turned from the window. The housekeeper's expression, as always, was composed but not unkind. "His lordship will take his breakfast in the study," she said. "He prefers solitude until midday." Dorothea nodded, pouring tea into her cup. "And after midday?" Mrs. Teasdale hesitated. "He walks, sometimes in the orchard, sometimes along the northern terrace. Alone." Dorothea smiled faintly. "Then I shall learn the art of silence. It seems a necessary skill here." The housekeeper's mouth twitched, almost a smile quickly hidden. "In this house, silence can be safer than truth, madam, but I suspect you already know that." She curtsied lightly and left, her footsteps fading into the endless hush of the hall. Dorothea took her tea by the fire, the warmth slowly returning to her hands. She studied the room that was now hers. The heavy drapes, the oak furniture, the faint scent of rosewater that clung to the upholstery. Everything around her spoke of wealth, of generations that had never known want, and yet it all felt oddly lifeless, as if joy had been banished long ago. By late morning, Dorothea gathered her courage and left her chamber. She walked through the wide corridor where portraits of the Ashbourne lineage stared down at her, stern faces, powdered wigs, and watchful eyes. Their painted gazes followed her like judgment made flesh. At the end of the hallway, she paused outside the study door. A faint sound reached her ear, pages turning, the soft scrape of a chair. She lifted her hand, hesitated, then knocked gently. "Enter," came his voice. It was calm, deliberate, and yet it made her heart leap as if it had struck a chord too deep to ignore. Dorothea pushed the door open. The study was vast, lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, filled with books whose spines gleamed like muted jewels. A fire burned low in the hearth. Leonard sat at a large mahogany desk, his posture precise, his dark coat buttoned despite the warmth. His unfocused eyes were fixed toward the sound of her steps, his hand resting on a closed book. "My lord," she said quietly, "forgive the intrusion." He tilted his head slightly. "Mrs. Ashbourne, I was told you dislike idleness." The corner of her mouth curved. "Then I am well understood." He gestured toward a nearby chair. "Sit, if you wish. The housekeeper has informed me you are attempting to learn the rhythm of Ashbourne." Dorothea obeyed, her movements graceful but uncertain. "The rhythm," she repeated, lowering herself onto the chair. "It does seem rather like music played in another room. One can hear it faintly, but never join in." His lips lifted in something that might have been amusement, a poetic observation. "I was not certain you would approve of poetry," she said gently. "I am not certain I do," he returned, "but I admire anyone who speaks without fear." Dorothea met his gaze, though she knew he could not truly see her. "Then you admire courage or recklessness?" "Perhaps both," he said softly. "I used to have a taste for both, before." She understood the pause. Before the accident, before the blindness, before isolation turned his life into a shadow of what it had been. He reached for a book on his desk, fingers brushing its spine with the tender familiarity of habit. "I keep these near," he said, "though they mock me. Words I can no longer see, thoughts I cannot escape." "Then let me read them to you," Dorothea said impulsively. He stilled. The fire crackled once between them, filling the silence. "You would do that? If you wish it. I do not recall wishing for anything in some time." "Then allow me to help you remember how." For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "You are very direct." "I find clarity easier than confusion," she replied. He exhaled, a sound that was neither laugh nor sigh. "Very well. Choose one. Something without sentiment." Dorothea rose, scanning the shelf beside her. Her fingertips brushed over the smooth leather bindings until they settled on a volume of essays. She carried it back, opened to a page, and began to read. Her voice filled the room softly, steady and low, carrying the rhythm of each word like a secret melody. Leonard sat motionless, his hand resting against his chin, listening not to the text, but to her voice itself. He seemed to drink it in like a man long deprived of sunlight. When she finished, the silence that followed was gentle, not heavy. "You read well," he said finally. "Thank you, my lord." "Leonard," he corrected, his tone quiet but firm. Dorothea hesitated, startled. "My lord, if we are to inhabit the same walls, you may as well use my name, at least when we are alone." Her pulse quickened. "Very well," she said softly. "Leonard." He turned his face slightly toward the sound of his name, as if savoring it. "It has been a long time since I heard it spoken without pity," he murmured, "or without calculation." "I meant neither." "I know," he said. Then, almost too softly, "That may be what unnerves me." Dorothea lowered her eyes to the book in her lap. Her cheeks warmed, not from embarrassment, but from the strange intimacy that had settled in the room. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm again. "Would you like me to read another?" He nodded once. "If you're not tired." "I never tire of words," she said, "only of silence." For the next hour she read to him. The fire burned low, the sound of her voice intertwined with the quiet crackle of the wood. Outside, the mist had begun to lift, and sunlight touched the tall windows, making the dust motes shimmer in gold. At some point, Leonard's hand drifted toward the edge of the table, his fingers tapping faintly in rhythm with her voice. It was the smallest of gestures, but Dorothea noticed it with a swell of tenderness she could not explain. When she closed the book, she looked up to find him listening still, his head slightly bowed, his expression softer than she had ever seen. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Finally he said, "You make the words sound alive again." Dorothea's throat tightened. Perhaps they were only waiting to be heard. He smiled faintly, and something inside her broke, just a little. "You have a dangerous talent," he said. "You make even despair sound beautiful." "Then I will be careful," she replied gently, "for I would not wish to beautify your despair." He turned toward her, his eyes distant but warm. "You are different from what I expected." Dorothea tilted her head. "And what did you expect?" "A woman eager to be a marchioness," he said simply. "Not a woman who treats me as though I am still a man." Her breath caught. "You are, Leonard." The words slipped out before she could temper them. His jaw tightened, but not with anger, rather with the raw, unfamiliar ache of being seen. "Careful, Dorothea," he whispered. "That sounds dangerously like kindness." She met his gaze, though he could not see it. "Then I will risk it." He looked away, as if retreating behind his composure once more. "You should walk in the gardens this afternoon," he said. "The orchard is pleasant when the sun appears. I prefer solitude, but you need not." Dorothea inclined her head. "If you wish me to keep out of your path, you may tell me so directly." "On the contrary," he said, almost smiling. "I merely wish not to be a duty." She stood, closing the book. "Then you must allow me to be something else." Her words lingered between them, warm and uncertain. Then she curtsied lightly and left the room. Later that day, Dorothea stepped into the garden. The fog had lifted completely, revealing rolling green lawns and the orchard beyond. The trees swayed gently, the air sweet with the faint promise of spring. She walked along the gravel path, her skirts brushing against the grass. For the first time since her arrival, she felt she could breathe. She reached the edge of the orchard and stopped, From a distance, she saw Leonard standing by one of the trees, his hand resting on its trunk. Mrs. Teasdale had said he walked alone, yet the sight of him there, solitary, motionless, moved her deeply. He did not hear her approach. She moved lightly, her steps muffled by the grass. He spoke suddenly, his voice low. "I can tell you are there." Dorothea startled. "I did not wish to disturb you." "You did not," he said, a faint smile curving his lips. "The air changes when someone stands too long behind me. I have learned to feel it. Then I am discovered." "Indeed." He turned slightly toward her. "Do you find the orchard pleasant?" "Very, though I suspect it would be lovelier in bloom." "You will see it when it blooms," he said quietly, "if you choose to stay." She hesitated, uncertain if he meant it as invitation or warning. "I gave my word, Leonard. I am not in the habit of breaking vows." He inclined his head. "Then perhaps there is hope for this household after all." They stood in silence for a while, the wind rustling softly through the branches. A few early blossoms had appeared on the trees, tiny white petals trembling against the grey sky. Leonard's hand brushed one, and he smiled faintly. "I can smell the sweetness even if I cannot see it." Dorothea stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Would you like me to describe it to you?" His head turned slightly toward her. "Would you?" She began softly, almost whispering. "The petals are white, with the faintest blush of pink near the edges. The branches are dark, twisted like old lace. The light catches the dew on them. It looks like pearls." He listened in silence, the lines of his face softening as if her words were painting the world back into existence. "You make me see it," he said at last. "You have that power." Dorothea's heart trembled. "Then I will use it carefully." When he turned his face toward her voice again, the distance between them was smaller than it had ever been. The moment hung suspended, fragile, charged with the quiet ache of something new forming between two wounded souls. "Thank you," he murmured, and though the words were simple, they carried the weight of something far deeper. Dorothea lowered her gaze, afraid that if she met his eyes, even unfocused as they were, she might lose herself completely. As the wind brushed through the orchard, carrying the scent of the first blossoms, Dorothea realized she was no longer merely surviving in this house of quiet rules. She was beginning to live. And for the first time since her wedding day, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps, within the shadows of Ashbourne Manor, love might yet learn to breathe again. The following morning dawned with a restless wind that swept across the Cotswold hills, bending the trees until their branches trembled like anxious hearts. Inside Ashbourne Manor, the air felt unusually still, as though the walls themselves were holding a secret. Dorothea woke before the servants' bells, her thoughts thick with the memory of Leonard's voice in the orchard the day before. The quiet gravity of it, the way he had listened to her as though each word rebuilt a world he had once lost. She dressed slowly, her fingers brushing the soft muslin of her gown, the pale cream fabric cinched at the empire waist by a simple silk ribbon. Her hair she arranged herself, leaving a few loose strands that fell near her temples. She looked at her reflection in the small mirror and saw not a marchioness, but a woman suspended between two worlds, neither a servant nor a wife in the full sense, neither captive nor free. The house stirred faintly as the hours passed. From the hall came the quiet rhythm of boots, the distant murmur of servants beginning their duties, the faint clatter of china in the breakfast room. Dorothea descended the stairs, pausing at the last step when she saw Leonard standing near the tall window that overlooked the courtyard. The light fell on him unevenly, touching the curve of his cheek and the dark line of his jaw. He did not turn when she entered, yet she felt he knew she was there. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but steady. Leonard inclined his head. "Mrs. Teasdale informs me you rise early. I find sleep less obedient when one's mind refuses peace." He smiled faintly. "Then we are alike in that." Dorothea hesitated, her fingers tightening around the folds of her gown. "Would you care for company at breakfast?" "I rarely care for company," he replied. "Then after a pause that softened the edge of his words. "But you may stay." Dorothea's heart flickered with something she dared not name. She took her seat at the small table near the window, where the morning light spilled like a blessing over the silver teapot and warm bread. Leonard stood opposite her, his movements precise as he poured his own tea, each gesture practiced from years of learning to rely on memory instead of sight. As they ate, the silence between them was not heavy but curious, filled with unspoken questions that neither quite dared to ask. Dorothea's eyes lingered on the faint scar near Leonard's temple, the delicate line that disappeared into his hair. It caught the light like a thread of silver. Without thinking, she asked, "Does it hurt still?" The wound. Leonard's hand stilled above his cup. For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then his voice came low, measured. "No, not the way it once did." "And now?" He turned his face slightly toward her, his gaze distant yet penetrating. "Now it is only a memory, one that never fades." Dorothea lowered her eyes. "Memories are cruel that way." "They are," he murmured, "especially the ones that pretend to be kind." The words lingered, soft but sharp, and Dorothea felt them settle deep in her chest. She wanted to ask more, to reach into the silence he carried and find what had been lost, but she sensed the line between sympathy and intrusion, and she would not cross it. Instead, she changed the subject, her tone gentler. "Would you like me to read again today?" He hesitated, and she saw his jaw tighten as though he meant to refuse. But when he spoke, his voice betrayed the faintest trace of vulnerability. "If you wish, I do," she said quietly. "Very much." That afternoon, the study glowed with the light of a late spring sun. Dust motes drifted like golden snow through the air as Dorothea sat near the window, a book open in her lap. Leonard sat across from her, his head turned slightly toward her voice as she read. The words, gentle and rhythmic, filled the space between them like a current, drawing them closer with each line. When she finished a passage, Leonard's lips parted, as though he wished to speak, but instead he rose abruptly and walked toward the window. He rested his hand on the sill, the sunlight falling across his face, catching in his eyes that were unfocused yet alive. "You make it sound as if the world is still worth hearing," he said quietly. Dorothea's breath caught. "It is, Leonard." He turned his head toward her voice. "For you, perhaps. For anyone who listens," she replied. He gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "Listening is easy. Seeing what remains after the noise fades, that is the difficulty." Dorothea rose, setting the book aside. She crossed the room, her steps slow, deliberate, until she stood near him. The light framed them both, gold on her hair, soft on his dark coat. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she should speak. Then she said, "You do not have to see to know what is still here." Leonard's jaw clenched. "Do not speak to me as if I am broken." Her heart clenched at the sudden sharpness in his voice. "That is not what I meant." He turned toward her, his expression shadowed with pride and pain. "Everyone means it," he said quietly. "They only choose kinder words." Dorothea's eyes shimmered, but she refused to look away. "Then perhaps I am crueler than the rest, because I see a man who is not broken at all, only wounded." He inhaled slowly, his composure cracking for the briefest instant. "And if you are wrong, then I will remain wrong," she said softly, "until you prove me right." The silence that followed trembled between them. Leonard's hand brushed the edge of the window frame. Then, as if compelled, he reached toward her. His fingers grazed the sleeve of her gown, barely a touch, light as breath. Dorothea did not move. Her pulse thundered in her ears, and yet she felt only stillness. Stillness and warmth, deep and disarming. He drew back suddenly, the moment breaking like glass. "Forgive me," he murmured, his voice rough. "I did not mean—" "You have nothing to apologize for," Dorothea said. "It was only a moment." "Moments can be dangerous," he replied, turning away, "especially when one begins to need them." Her breath trembled. "Then let us be careful, Leonard." "Not afraid." He said nothing, but she saw his shoulders tense, his hand gripping the edge of the desk as though it anchored him to reason. When she left the room, her heart was beating so fast it felt alive in her throat. The hallway air was cooler, the quiet more pronounced after the heat of their exchange. Dorothea paused, pressing her hand to her chest, wondering why the mere brush of his fingers had shaken her so deeply. Later that evening, as dusk settled over the manor, Mrs. Teasdale entered Dorothea's room, carrying a small folded letter sealed in wax. "This came for you," she said. Dorothea frowned, taking it. "For me?" The housekeeper nodded. "Delivered by hand. The messenger said it was from the solicitor's office in town." A chill swept through her. She thanked Mrs. Teasdale and waited until the door closed before she broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the neat, cold handwriting, each line striking her like a blade. It was not a letter of kindness, but of confirmation, a record of settlement, a transaction completed in full. It detailed the exact sum paid to clear her father's debt, and beneath it, the note that made her blood run cold. The marriage of Miss Dorothea Hollis to the Marquis of Ashbourne having been arranged in satisfaction of said amount. She read it twice, unable to breathe. The words blurred, the ink seeming to bleed into the page. Though she had known the truth in her heart, seeing it written so plainly was unbearable. There, in black ink, her entire worth had been reduced to numbers and signatures. Dorothea folded the letter slowly, her fingers trembling, and hid it inside the lining of her trunk, beneath her shawls. The paper felt like a sin, a secret that could destroy the fragile peace she had begun to build. That night, unable to sleep, she walked to the corridor outside the study. The firelight from within flickered against the doorframe. She heard movement, a restless pacing, and then Leonard's voice, low and raw, murmuring words she could not quite discern. He was having a nightmare, or perhaps speaking to ghosts only he could hear. Dorothea hesitated, then gently knocked. There was no answer, only silence. She pushed the door open a few inches. Leonard stood near the hearth, his hands gripping the mantel, his breathing unsteady. The sight tore at her. "Leonard," she said softly. He turned sharply, startled. "Dorothea, what?" "I heard you," she said. "I thought you might need help." His expression wavered between pride and pain. "You should not see me like this." "I already have," she whispered. He sank into the chair by the fire, exhaustion shadowing his face. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Dorothea crossed the room and knelt beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Would you like me to read?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "Not tonight." The words would only echo. "Then I will sit with you." "You need not." "I know." The air between them thickened with unspoken things. Dorothea folded her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed on the flames. After a moment, Leonard said, "I sometimes dream of the light, how it looked before. I wake and forget it's gone. Then I remember, and it feels as if I've lost it twice." Dorothea's throat tightened. "Perhaps the light is not gone," she said softly. "Perhaps it waits for you in other forms." He turned toward her voice, his expression unreadable. "You speak as if you've seen it." "I see it now," she whispered. "In you." He laughed once, low and bitter, but there was no cruelty in it. "You are either a saint or a fool, Dorothea Hollis." "Neither," she said, meeting his shadowed gaze. "Only a woman who believes that even broken things can still be beautiful." Leonard's hand twitched, as if to reach for her, but he stopped himself. "You do not understand the cost of kindness," he said. "It creates debts of the heart that are far harder to repay." Dorothea smiled faintly. "Then let me be indebted." Their eyes met, his unfocused yet piercing, hers steady and luminous. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything neither dared to say. When at last she rose to leave, Leonard caught her hand lightly. His touch was careful, uncertain, as though he feared his fingers might burn her. "You have a way of quieting the noise," he murmured. Dorothea's breath trembled. "And you have a way of making silence feel alive." He released her slowly, his fingers trailing away as though reluctant to let go. As she walked back to her chamber, the corridor seemed changed. The air was warmer, the shadows softer. Yet beneath the warmth pulsed the secret folded beneath her gowns, the letter, the proof of her price. It was a weight she carried alone, heavy and cold against her heart. But for that one fragile night, beneath the flickering light of the fire, Dorothea allowed herself to believe that what bound them was not a bargain written in ink, but something far more dangerous, far more human, a kindness that, if left unguarded, could become love. The early days of April brought a timid warmth to the Cotswold hills, a fragile promise of spring. The mornings were still veiled in mist, but the air carried the scent of new blossoms, and the manor, once sealed in gloom, seemed to stir with cautious life. In her chamber, Dorothea stood by the window, the first rays of sunlight brushing her face like a hesitant hand. She felt lighter than she had in weeks, though she could not have said why. Perhaps it was the quiet memory of the night she had spent in the study, Leonard's voice near hers, his hand briefly catching her own before releasing it, the shared silence that had seemed to breathe. That morning, she found herself humming softly as she pinned her hair and tied the ribbons of her gown. The melody was something her mother had sung long ago, before the debts and the despair. It was not joy exactly that she felt. It was hope, fragile and trembling, like the first petal daring to open before the frost has passed. When she entered the breakfast room, Leonard was already there. He stood near the window, his posture erect, his expression unreadable as ever. The light from the glass fell against him in pale gold, catching in the dark strands of his hair. For a fleeting moment, he looked less like a man haunted by loss, and more like one merely waiting for someone, to arrive. "Good morning, my lord," Dorothea said softly. He turned toward her voice. "Dorothea, you are early again." "The house wakes early," she replied with a small smile, "and I find sleep less necessary when there is much to think about." He inclined his head slightly. "A dangerous confession. Thinking too much can turn even blessings into burdens." "Then I am already guilty," she said. Leonard's mouth curved almost imperceptibly. "I suspect you are guilty of many things you refuse to regret." Dorothea poured tea into his cup, her movements slow and deliberate. The faint aroma of chamomile rose between them. "Would you prefer coffee today?" "No. Tea is gentler." "Gentleness," she said quietly, "seems to be what this house lacks most." He turned his face toward her, his unfocused eyes sharp with curiosity. "And you believe you can restore it?" Dorothea set the teapot down carefully. "I don't know, but I believe it can return if one allows it." He did not reply. Instead, he lifted his cup, holding it with the poise of a man who still lived by habit more than need. She watched the graceful precision of his hands and thought how much strength there was in restraint. After breakfast, Leonard retreated to his study, as was his custom. Dorothea spent the morning tending to the garden, a task she had quietly claimed as her own. The soil was damp and cool, the scent of earth rich and comforting. She pruned the rose bushes, careful not to cut too much, whispering to them as though they might understand. It was there, among the roses, that she heard his voice again, measured, calm, unmistakable. "You work as though the garden owes you gratitude," Leonard said. Dorothea turned quickly. He stood a few paces behind her, guided by his cane. His coat was dark, but his collar gleamed white against it, and his expression was softened by the morning light. "I find the garden listens better than most people," she said lightly. He smiled faintly. "It has that advantage. It cannot argue." Dorothea brushed dirt from her gloves. "I prefer its honesty. It rewards care and punishes neglect without pretense." He tilted his head slightly. "And which do I deserve?" She met his gaze, her heart tightening. "You are neither neglected nor punished, Leonard. You are waiting to grow again." The silence between them deepened, filled with the quiet hum of bees and the whisper of leaves. Leonard took a slow breath. You speak as though I am one of your roses. Perhaps you are, she said softly, thorns and all. He laughed then, a low, unexpected sound that startled them both. It was not cruel or bitter, but warm, almost disbelieving. You are far too bold for a woman who was meant to be obedient. Dorothea smiled, her cheeks flushing with quiet victory. Then perhaps obedience does not suit me. For a moment Leonard said nothing. He reached out, his hands searching the air until his fingertips brushed one of the rose bushes. A small thorn caught his glove, and he winced. Dorothea moved without thinking, taking his hand gently in hers. "Careful," she whispered. "These roses test those who reach for them." Her gloved fingers covered his. She could feel the tremor beneath his composure, the quickened pulse that matched her own. He did not pull away. "You see," she murmured, "even beauty can wound." Leonard's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Then it is wiser not to reach for it." Dorothea looked up at him, the sunlight turning her hair to gold. "And live without ever touching what might heal you?" His lips parted as though to reply, but no words came. The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of roses and earth. Dorothea stepped back slowly, releasing his hand. "I will have Mrs. Teasdale bring you salve for the scratch," she said, "though I doubt it will leave a mark." He smiled faintly, a shadow of something gentler than pride crossing his face. "Some marks do not need to be seen to be felt." Dorothea turned away, her breath unsteady. She could still feel the warmth of his hand lingering against her palm. Later that afternoon, a carriage arrived at the gates, a physician summoned by Mrs. Teasdale, who had long urged Leonard to accept a checkup. The doctor, an older man with a weathered face and keen eyes, entered the study while Dorothea waited nearby in the hall. Their voices carried faintly through the door, the doctor's tone measured, Leonard's reserved but curious. After some time the door opened. The doctor emerged, adjusting his gloves, his expression thoughtful. Dorothea rose at once. "How does he fare?" she asked softly. The doctor hesitated. "Better than I expected. The injury is stable, but there are signs of change. It's unusual." Dorothea frowned. "Change? An improvement in the optic nerve, perhaps. I cannot promise anything, but there is reason to hope." Her heart gave a startled leap. "You mean his sight?" "Possibly. Faint light, vague shapes, perhaps. It happens, on rare occasions. Tell him nothing certain, he will not believe me anyway. But watch him. If he mentions seeing brightness or movement, note it. It may be the beginning of something." He bowed and departed, leaving Dorothea motionless in the corridor. Hope, sharp and glittering, filled her chest until she could scarcely breathe. That evening, as the sky blushed with the colors of sunset, Dorothea brought tea to the study. Leonard sat near the window, his profile outlined by the fading light. She hesitated before speaking. "The doctor seemed pleased," she said gently. "He always says that," Leonard murmured. "It is his trade to sell hope." "Hope is not a thing for sale," she said. "It is something one earns." He smiled without turning his head. "And have I earned it, Dorothea?" She set the tray down carefully. "Perhaps not yet, but you have begun to deserve it." He was silent for a long moment. Then, very softly, he said, "Today, for the first time in years, I felt the sunlight differently, as though it reached through the darkness instead of stopping at it." Dorothea's breath caught. "You saw it?" "I do not know. Perhaps I imagined it. A faint glow, nothing more." She stepped closer, her heart hammering. "That is not nothing, Leonard. That is the beginning of light." He turned his face toward her voice, and though his eyes still lacked focus, something in them had changed. A flicker, a depth she had not seen before. "You sound as though you want this more than I do." "I do," she said before she could stop herself. "Because you deserve to see again." He tilted his head, his voice low and searching. "Do you wish it for my sake, or for your own?" Dorothea met his gaze steadily. "Does it matter if it is wished with all my heart?" He stood slowly, guided more by instinct than sight, and took a step closer. The distance between them shrank until she could feel the heat of his breath. "You speak like a poet," he murmured, "and poets are dangerous creatures." "Ah, then perhaps I am one," she whispered. His hand lifted, hesitated, then traced the air near her cheek without touching. "If I could see," he said, "I would know whether your eyes are as brave as your words." "They are," she said, her voice trembling. He smiled faintly. "Then I will take your word for it." The sound of footsteps in the corridor broke the moment. Dorothea stepped back, her pulse racing. Mrs. Teasdale appeared at the door, her composure as precise as ever. "Forgive the interruption, my lord. The evening mail has arrived." Leonard nodded. "Leave it on the desk." The housekeeper curtsied and withdrew. Dorothea gathered the empty teacups and turned toward the door. Leonard's voice stopped her. "You said earlier that the house lacks gentleness," he said quietly. "Perhaps you were right, but it seems to have found its way back, through you." Her throat tightened. "Then I hope I am worthy of it." "You are," he said simply. Dorothea bowed her head, unwilling to let him see the tears glistening in her eyes. "Good night, Leonard." "Good night, Dorothea." When she left the room, the corridor seemed filled with light, though only a few lamps burned. She paused by the window, the night wind touching her face, and closed her eyes. Somewhere in the manor, Leonard Ashbourne sat surrounded by shadows, yet she felt that he had begun to see the world again, not with his eyes, but through her. And for the first time since her arrival, Dorothea allowed herself a fragile, secret smile. For love, she realized, does not announce itself. It begins quietly, in small mercies and soft words, and before one knows it, it becomes the very air one breathes. The following days unfolded beneath skies that shifted from pearl grey to silver blue, and the manor seemed to breathe differently. A fragile transformation lingered in every corridor, a change Dorothea felt but could not yet name. Leonard spent long hours near the windows now, drawn to the light, like a man reacquainting himself with an old friend. He would stand there in silence, his eyes narrowed as if straining to remember what sunlight looked like, and Dorothea often found herself watching him from the doorway, unseen, yet completely seen. Every morning she prepared his tea herself, unwilling to trust anyone else with so delicate a ritual. The act had become a quiet devotion. She would enter his study at 9:30, her steps careful, her hands steady, though her pulse betrayed her. Leonard would always sense her before she spoke. "I can hear the rustle of your skirts," he said one morning, his tone almost teasing. "You move as softly as a ghost, Dorothea." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps I haunt you." He turned his head toward her, a slow smile touching his lips. "If so, I have no wish to be rid of you." She poured his tea, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. "You seem stronger," she said, breaking the spell gently. "I am," he replied, "though I scarcely dare to believe it. The light feels different each day, brighter, nearer. Yesterday I thought I saw motion, today I think I saw shadow." "That sounds like progress," Dorothea said softly. "Or delusion," he murmured. "I no longer know which comforts me more." Dorothea set the cup before him and sat opposite, folding her hands in her lap. "Hope is not delusion, Leonard. It is courage pretending to be faith." He gave a quiet laugh. "You speak as if you have studied both." "Perhaps I have." There was warmth in their silence after that, unspoken, cautious, but undeniably alive. By the week's end, Dorothea noticed that Leonard's steps had grown more confident. He no longer relied as heavily on his cane inside the house, moving instead with the steady assurance of memory and instinct. Yet there was restlessness in him too, a stirring of something that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. He would stand near the long windows of the parlour, his face tilted to the sun, his hands clenched at his sides as if he were holding back a storm. One afternoon she found him there again, his figure framed by light. The shadows played across his features, revealing a man caught between two worlds, one of darkness, one of awakening. "You will wear out the view," she teased gently. He smiled without turning. "It is a view worth testing. The more I stare, the more I think I can see outlines. The sky is brighter, the walls lighter. It is as if the world were returning to me piece by piece. Dorothea stepped closer, her heart swelling with quiet joy. Then you must not lose heart. The world is waiting to be seen again. He turned slightly toward her voice. Perhaps, but I find myself afraid as well. What if the world I see again is not the one I remember? She hesitated. Then you will make a new one. He smiled faintly. You make everything sound possible. That is because you still believe it is not, she replied softly. He laughed quietly, a sound that had become rarer, but no less precious. You argue like a poet and a philosopher. Dangerous combination. Then I shall keep you on your guard. Their eyes met, or rather, his unfocused gaze found hers, and Dorothea felt that familiar, perilous pull between them. It was not passion in the crude sense, but something finer, deeper, the kind of yearning born not of desire, but of recognition. She wanted to reach for him, to touch the hand that hovered near the glass, to feel again that fragile line between distance and closeness. But before she could move, a voice intruded. "My dear cousin," came a smooth, confident tone from the doorway. Leonard stiffened, his hand tightening on the window frame. Dorothea turned. Standing there was a man of perhaps 35, elegantly dressed in a dark blue tailcoat, his hair perfectly arranged, his smile polished and practiced. "Edmund," Leonard said slowly, his voice controlled. "You were not expected." "No," Edmund replied easily, stepping into the room. "But then, I have never been one to arrive by invitation when concern is involved." Dorothea's heart tightened. So this was Edmund Ashbourne, the cousin she had heard mentioned in hushed tones by the servants, the one whose visits had always been rare, but never entirely welcome. "Concern?" Leonard asked coolly. "Why, yes," Edmund said, his tone all charm. "Rumours travel even to London, you know. Tales of a miraculous improvement, of light returning, where none was thought possible. I could not resist seeing it for myself." Leonard's jaw tightened. "You could have written," Edmund laughed lightly. "And be ignored as usual?" "No, cousin. I prefer conversation face to face. And who is this?" Dorothea rose gracefully, her composure unshaken, though she felt his scrutiny like a blade. "Dorothea Ashbourne," she said evenly. "Your cousin's wife." "Ah," Edmund murmured, bowing slightly. "The mysterious bride. I had wondered if you were real, or merely another village legend." His eyes, sharp and appraising, lingered too long. Dorothea met them without flinching. "I assure you, sir, I am quite real." Leonard's voice, low and firm, cut through the tension. "That will be enough, Edmund. My wife deserves your respect, not your curiosity." Edmund smiled with mock humility. "Of course, cousin. Forgive my forwardness. I only meant that the village has been abuzz since your marriage, an event few of us were invited to celebrate." "Because it was not a celebration," Leonard said dryly. "It was a necessity." Dorothea's heart constricted, though she understood his meaning. Edmund, however, seized on the words like a hawk spotting prey. "A necessity," he echoed smoothly. "How pragmatic of you both." And yet, his eyes flicked toward Dorothea. "You seem far too lovely to be a matter of necessity." Leonard's expression hardened. "Enough!" Edmund raised his hands in mock surrender. "Peace, cousin. I meant no harm. You have grown fierce in your exile here. Perhaps it suits you." "Perhaps you should remember you are a guest in my home," Leonard replied. Edmund inclined his head, unruffled. "Then I shall behave as one. May I remain a few days?" "I promise to be unobtrusive." Leonard hesitated, clearly unwilling but too proud to refuse outright. "Very well," he said curtly. "The West Wing remains prepared. Mrs. Teasdale will see to your needs." As Edmund departed, Dorothea caught the faintest trace of satisfaction in his smile. It chilled her more than his words. When the door closed, Leonard exhaled. "He brings disruption wherever he goes." "Does he mean to harm you?" Dorothea asked softly. "No," Leonard said. "He means only to remind me that he can." She hesitated. "He looked at you with envy." Leonard gave a quiet laugh. Envy is his most fluent language. But pay him no mind, Dorothea. He feeds on reaction. I will try, she said. But as the evening wore on, she found it difficult to shake the unease Edmund's presence had awakened. He dined with them that night, his charm filling every corner of the room. He spoke of London, of music halls, political gossip, endless dinners with noble families. He painted the city as a world of light and elegance, far removed from the quiet gravity of Ashbourne Manor. You would thrive there, cousin, Edmund said with a sly smile. Even with your condition, the right company would make you welcome again. I am content here, Leonard replied coldly. Contentment, Edmund mused, is the polite term for surrender. Dorothea placed her fork down softly. And arrogance, Mr. Ashbourne, is the polite term for loneliness. The table fell silent. Leonard turned his face toward her voice, a hint of admiration glinting behind his restraint. Edmund, caught off guard, recovered with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Touché, cousin's wife, he murmured. After dinner, as they rose from the table, Leonard offered his arm to Dorothea. She took it, her heart thrumming as he guided her toward the parlour. His grip was firm yet gentle, and when their hands brushed, a spark passed between them, unseen but undeniable. In the dim glow of the parlour fire, he said softly, "You handled him well." "I spoke what I felt," she replied. "Few dare to do that in this house." "Perhaps it needs daring," she said. He turned his head slightly, his voice lowering. "You are changing things here, Dorothea. Even I can feel it." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps the house is finally breathing again." For a moment, he was silent. Then, with rare tenderness, he said, "If light truly returns to me, it will not be from the sun. It will be because of you." Her breath caught. She wanted to reply, to tell him what those words meant, but before she could, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Edmund's voice drifted through the half-open door, low and mocking. "Careful, cousin," he murmured. "The world may forgive many things, but not the illusion of happiness." Leonard's hand clenched briefly over Dorothea's. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Then let the world choke on its illusions," he said softly. Dorothea's heart swelled with pride and fear all at once. She knew then that whatever had begun between them, this fragile tenderness, this quiet defiance, would soon be tested by more than blindness or solitude. For the first time, she realized that love, when born in shadow, must fight harder to survive the light. Spring had taken firm hold of the Cotswolds, softening the hills with green and painting the orchards in pale bloom. The scent of apple flowers drifted through open windows, and sunlight, once a stranger to Ashbourne Manor, now entered freely, falling over the dark wood and faded velvet as if reclaiming forgotten corners. For Dorothea, each morning felt like a quiet miracle. And yet, beneath the beauty of the season, she sensed a tremor in the air, something tender and dangerous, awakening alongside the light. Leonard's sight had improved little by little, like dawn spreading over a long, stubborn night. He could see shapes now, the glow of the fire, the blur of a figure moving across a room, and though he never spoke of it openly, she could tell by the way his head followed her when she walked, the way his gaze lingered a fraction too long when she stood near the window. One morning she found him seated in the garden, a book resting in his lap. The air shimmered with the song of larks. He did not turn when she approached, but his hand brushed the bench beside him as if inviting her to sit. "You walk more lightly than the breeze," he said. "I feared disturbing you," Dorothea replied, settling beside him. "You never disturb me," he said, his voice low. "You only change the silence." She smiled, her eyes softening. "For better or worse?" "For better," he said after a pause, "though I am not certain I deserve it." She turned to him, her heart tightening. "Why must you always speak as though kindness were a debt to be repaid?" He smiled faintly, his hand closing over the book. "Perhaps because I have owed more than I can ever return." They fell into quiet then, the kind that feels like shared thought. The sunlight flickered through the branches, scattering gold across his face. Dorothea studied him. The fine lines near his mouth, the faint color returning to his cheeks, the dark lashes casting shadows against his skin. There was strength in him again, but also an ache, as if he were relearning what it meant to live. "Leonard," she said softly, "the doctor would be astonished by your progress." He turned toward her voice, his eyes half-focused now. "I do not trust progress," he murmured. "It can vanish like breath on glass." "And yet you still breathe," she said, her voice trembling. His lips curved. "Because you remind me to." Dorothea looked away quickly, afraid that her gaze might betray her heart. For a moment she thought he could see her expression, the warmth in her eyes. Then he said almost wonderingly, "The light feels stronger today. I can make out the shape of your gown." She froze, her breath catching. "You can see me?" "Not clearly," he said, his voice cautious, almost reverent. "Only the outline, the movement when you turn your head. It's as if the world is painted in mist and you are the first shape to emerge." Dorothea's pulse quickened. She could not speak. She only smiled through the tears that rose unbidden. He frowned slightly, sensing her silence. "You are quiet. Does that frighten you?" "No," she whispered. "It humbles me." Leonard leaned back against the bench, the faintest trace of sunlight glinting in his eyes. "I thought I had forgotten what faces look like," he said softly. "But now, when I close my eyes, I imagine yours, and though I have never truly seen it, I think I would know it anywhere." Her throat tightened painfully. "Then you already see more than most men ever will." Their gazes met, his uncertain but piercing, hers steady though trembling, and something passed between them, invisible and undeniable. From the terrace, Edmund's voice intruded, breaking the spell. "Ah, the miracle continues," he drawled. "Cousin, you look almost alive again." Leonard's jaw tensed. "Good morning, Edmund." Dorothea rose from the bench, her calm composure returning like a mask. Edmund descended the steps leisurely, every movement precise, his smile sharp as a blade. "I see I interrupt something profound," he said, his tone light but edged. "Only conversation," Dorothea said evenly. "Between husband and wife," Edmund murmured. "How novel. You must be very persuasive, Mrs. Ashbourne. Few women can hold my cousin's attention for more than an hour." Leonard's hand clenched on his cane. "Do not test my patience, Edmund." Edmund raised a brow. "Ah, there it is. The temper. I was beginning to wonder if convalescence had softened you." Dorothea intervened quietly. "Perhaps you might give him peace instead of provocation." Edmund's gaze flicked to her, assessing. "Peace rarely leads to truth, my dear, and truth, I find, is far more entertaining." "Then I fear you mistake cruelty for honesty," she said. His smile widened and he bowed slightly. "Touché again. You have spirit, Mrs. Ashbourne. I almost pity my cousin." Leonard rose slowly. "Leave us." "Of course," Edmund said smoothly. "I wouldn't dream of spoiling the sunlight. Enjoy it while it lasts." He walked away, the sound of his boots fading over the gravel. Dorothea turned back to Leonard, who stood tense and unmoving, his face shadowed with anger he refused to show. "Do not let him disturb you," she said softly. "He disturbs everything," Leonard murmured. "The air feels colder when he enters a room." "Then let me warm it again," she said gently. He turned toward her voice. "You already do." That evening, the sky blazed with gold as the sun began to set. Dorothea had spent the afternoon in the garden, her hands trembling every time she thought of Leonard's words. When she returned to the manor, she found him waiting near the parlour, standing before the large mirror by the hearth. He was staring at his own reflection, or trying to. The light from the fire painted his face in amber tones, softening the stern lines of his features. "I wondered when you would come," he said quietly. "I did not know you expected me." He smiled faintly. "I always do now." Dorothea stepped closer. "You seem restless tonight." He nodded. "There is something I must see." Her heart thudded. "See?" He gestured toward the window. "The light changes at dusk. Sometimes I think I can see clearer then. Stay near me, Dorothea." She obeyed, moving to stand before him. The last rays of the sun streamed through the tall windows, catching her hair, turning it to molten gold. Leonard's breath caught. "Dorothea," he whispered. "Don't move." Her voice trembled. "What is it?" "I can see you," he said softly, disbelief threading through the words. "Not shadows, not light. You." Her eyes widened, tears rising as he took a slow, hesitant step closer. His gaze fixed on her face, still uncertain, but filled with wonder, as if the world had opened before him. "You're real," he murmured. "I've imagined this moment so many times that I feared it would destroy me. But now," Dorothea's heart beat painfully. "And what do you see, Leonard?" He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. A woman standing in light, her face gentle and strong all at once. The kind of face a man could lose himself in and find himself again. Dorothea's lips parted, her breath unsteady. "Then you see the truth." He smiled faintly, still in awe. "And it is more beautiful than I deserved." Their eyes met fully for the first time. The weight of months, the uncertainty, the fear, the longing, collapsed into that single breathless instant. Leonard lifted a hand, his fingertips brushing her cheek. His touch was reverent, hesitant, as though afraid she might vanish if he held her too tightly. "I have dreamed of this," he whispered, "of knowing the face that spoke my name in darkness." Tears slipped down Dorothea's cheeks, her voice shaking. "Then remember it, Leonard. Not because it belongs to me, but because it was meant for you." His thumb brushed away one tear, the gesture tender beyond words. "You have given me back the world," he said. "And I—" He stopped, his breath uneven, emotion catching in his throat. "I do not know how to thank you." Dorothea smiled through her tears. "Then don't. Simply live." He drew a slow breath, his gaze drinking her in, as though memorizing every detail before the light could fade. "You've changed everything," he murmured. "The house feels alive again. The air, the sound of footsteps, even the silence, it all carries you." "I am only myself," she said softly. "That is precisely what I mean." The light dimmed as the sun sank beyond the horizon. Leonard blinked, the outlines already blurring, but he did not look away. "I will remember," he said quietly, "even when the light is gone." Dorothea's throat ached with feeling. "It won't be gone," she whispered. "Not anymore." For a long moment, neither moved. The fire crackled softly, the air heavy with warmth and longing. There was no need for further words. Everything had been said in the space between heartbeats. Then Leonard stepped back, breaking the spell gently. "You should rest," he said, his voice low. "Tomorrow will bring more light." Dorothea nodded, though part of her wished the night would never come. "Good night, Leonard." "Good night, Dorothea." As she turned to leave, he said her name once more, softer than breath. She paused at the door, her heart full. "Yes, I have seen many things in my life," he murmured, "but nothing as precious as the moment I saw you." Dorothea closed her eyes, her lips trembling with unspoken words. She did not answer. She could not. She only walked away slowly, the echo of his voice following her down the corridor like a vow made not with promises, but with light. Outside, the first stars emerged over Ashbourne, shining faintly above the darkened orchard. And within the great house, two hearts, once trapped in shadow, beat quietly in the fragile dawn of something that neither dared yet to name, though both already felt it was love. The morning after Leonard saw Dorothea's face for the first time was one of impossible stillness. The manor, bathed in a pale gold light, seemed to hold its breath, as if every beam and brick knew something had changed between them. Dorothea rose before dawn, unable to quiet her racing heart. She moved through her morning routine as if in a dream, her mind returning again and again to the look in his eyes when he had seen her. That wonder, that fragile reverence. It had not been the gaze of a man recovering sight, but of a soul remembering what beauty felt like. And yet joy was never allowed to rest long in this house. The silence held weight that morning, as though it waited for an echo neither dared to name. When she entered the breakfast room, Leonard stood by the window, already dressed. His silhouette was dark against the pale light, but when he turned toward her, she caught the faint glimmer of awareness in his eyes. He could see her shape clearly now. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning, Leonard." He smiled, almost shyly. "I can see the blue of your gown." Her breath caught. "You can?" "Yes. It is faint, like the memory of a color I once knew, but it is there." She looked down at the soft periwinkle muslin she wore, her heart tightening. "Then the world is returning to you." "Perhaps only you are," he said quietly. Dorothea lowered her gaze, fighting the warmth that rose to her cheeks. The moment was tender, fragile, and she might have let it bloom had not the sound of a door opening broken the spell. Edmund entered, immaculate as ever, his smile polite but cold. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. "I would not dream of disturbing the happy household, but a matter of business has arrived that demands your attention, cousin." Leonard turned slightly, his expression guarded. "Business?" "Yes, from the solicitor in Oxford. He requested that I deliver it personally, as I happened to be in town yesterday." He placed a sealed envelope on the table beside the tea service. Dorothea froze, every muscle in her body turning to ice. The seal, the same color, the same emblem, she recognized it instantly. It was the same as the one on the letter she had hidden weeks ago. "Thank you," Leonard said curtly. "I'll review it later." "As you wish," Edmund replied. "Though I dare say it concerns both your fortune and your charming wife, it would be unwise to delay." Dorothea felt the blood drain from her face. She met Edmund's gaze for the briefest second, and saw, beneath his mask of civility, a flicker of triumph. "Very well," Leonard said. "You may leave it with me." Edmund bowed slightly. "Of course, I am only ever here to serve." He turned and left, the click of his boots echoing down the corridor. Dorothea's hand trembled as she poured Leonard's tea. She avoided his gaze, praying he would not open the letter now, not while she was there to watch his expression change, to see the truth tear through the fragile peace they had built. But Leonard was already breaking the seal. He unfolded the paper carefully, the rustle loud in the stillness of the room. His eyes, though still dim, moved slowly over the words. Dorothea forced herself to stand still, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened. Silence stretched thin. Then Leonard's hand dropped to the table, the paper fluttered to the floor. "Dorothea," he said, his voice low and disbelieving, "what is this?" She turned, her lips parting, but no sound came. He held out the page, his fingers trembling. "Is this true?" Dorothea's vision blurred. She took a step toward him, her heart pounding. "Please!" He rose abruptly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Was I a debt to be paid?" The words cut through her like a blade. She wanted to deny it, but the truth stood between them, undeniable. "I did not know," she whispered. "Not until after." He laughed softly, a broken, bitter sound. "Not until after you had become my wife. Convenient timing." Dorothea's voice shook. "It was my father's doing. I had no choice." "No choice," he repeated, his tone sharp. "And yet you stayed, you smiled, you read to me, you touched my hand as if it meant something." "It did," she said, her voice trembling with tears. "It does." He turned away, his hands gripping the back of the chair. "You should have told me." "I feared losing what we had just begun to find," she whispered. "I feared that if you knew the truth you would see me as he did, as a thing bought and paid for." His silence was heavier than shouting. When he finally turned, his face was pale, his expression unreadable. "And what am I to see you as now?" Dorothea's eyes filled with tears. "As I truly am, a woman who loves you." He flinched as though the words themselves struck him. "Love," he repeated softly. "Can love be born from deceit?" "Yes," she said fiercely, "because the heart does not ask permission to feel. It only knows when it has found its home." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice, low and breaking, filled the space between them. "I would have given you everything," he said, "all of it freely, but you never asked. You let me believe it was my choice." Dorothea stepped closer, desperate. It was. Every kindness, every word, every glance. It was real, Leonard. Whatever bargain brought me here, it ended the moment I looked at you and saw not a debt, but a man. He looked at her then, truly looked, and for a second she thought she saw forgiveness flicker in his eyes, but it vanished beneath the storm gathering there. "I need time," he said, his voice hoarse. "Leave me." She hesitated, tears streaking her cheeks. "Please, leave," he said again, more firmly. Dorothea turned and fled, her vision blurring as she ran up the staircase. The corridor spun around her, her breath catching on sobs she could no longer contain. In her chamber she collapsed onto the bed, clutching the pillow to her chest. Below, the manor echoed with silence once more. Leonard remained in the breakfast room for a long time. The letter lay crumpled beside him, the sunlight spilling over the cruel words that had undone him. Payment received in full, marriage to Miss Hollis executed per agreement. He stared at the ink until the letters blurred together. He thought of her voice in the garden, the warmth of her hand on his, the way she had stood in light the night before, her face filled with quiet courage. Could such tenderness have been false? Could she have played such devotion so perfectly? He closed his eyes, but all he saw was her face, the one he had just begun to know, and the pain that had trembled there when he spoke. Hours passed. Afternoon shadows stretched long across the floor. Edmund entered quietly, his steps measured. "I thought I might find you here," he said. Leonard did not look at him. "You've done what you came to do." "On the contrary," Edmund said smoothly, "I came to protect you." Leonard's voice was cold. "From what?" "From humiliation," Edmund replied. "From a woman who used your name to erase her father's disgrace. Surely even you can see what she is." Leonard's hands clenched. "Be careful, Edmund." Edmund smiled faintly. "You've always been too proud to see deception when it wears a kind face. But she fooled you, cousin. She fooled everyone. Do you really think a woman like that could ever love a man who cannot even—" He didn't finish. Leonard's fist struck the edge of the table with a sound that silenced the room. "Enough," Leonard said, his voice trembling with fury. "Say one more word against her and I'll see you out of this house." Edmund raised his brows, unruffled. "Then at least open your eyes, cousin. She's already taken what she came for." He left before Leonard could reply, the echo of his words hanging like poison in the air. By nightfall, the manor had fallen into uneasy quiet. Candles burned low in their holders, and the fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers. Leonard sat alone in the study, the contract lying open on the desk before him. The words mocked him, cold and final. And yet, beneath the anger, something softer stirred, a voice that refused to be silenced. She stayed. She had tended the gardens. She had read to him when the world was dark. She had faced Edmund without fear. Could a woman acting out of greed have done any of that? He pressed his palms against his eyes, the weight of conflicting truths tearing at him. He wanted to hate her, but hate would not come. Only sorrow and the unbearable ache of loss. In her chamber above, Dorothea sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the orchard. The pale light washed over her face, her tears glistening like dew. She knew she could not stay, not after what he had read. The fragile trust she had built was gone, shattered by paper and ink. And yet, as the night deepened, one thought refused to leave her heart. He had looked at her, truly looked, and for a brief, shining moment there had been love in his eyes. No contract could undo that. She rose slowly, crossed to the mirror, and touched her reflection. "If this is to end," she whispered, "let him at least remember that I loved him honestly." Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the orchard, scattering petals like tears across the grass. Within the great house, two hearts, divided by pride and pain, kept the same silence, each reaching for the other in the darkness, each too wounded to believe the other might still be waiting. The following morning dawned grey and silent, the air heavy with rain. Ashbourne Manor seemed emptier than ever, its corridors echoing with the kind of stillness that follows loss. The servants spoke in whispers, moving carefully as though afraid to disturb the grief that clung to the house. Dorothea's chamber stood open and bare, her few belongings packed away, her presence erased as swiftly as if she had been a dream. Only the faint scent of lavender lingered where she had slept, the last trace of her soft rebellion against despair. Leonard had not slept. He had spent the night in his study, pacing between the fire and the window, every creak of the floorboards punctuating the ache in his chest. On the desk lay the cursed document, still crumpled from where he had thrown it, the ink smudged where his fingers had pressed too hard. He had told himself she was gone because she had deceived him, because he needed peace, but peace refused to come. What he felt instead was absence, raw, unrelenting, and worse than blindness itself. When morning light broke through the clouds, he could see it. He could see everything. The outlines were sharper, the colors clearer. The miracle he had once prayed for had come to him at last. But as he looked around the room, all he saw was emptiness, and the knowledge struck him like a cruel joke. He had regained sight only to find that the one person he longed to behold was no longer there. Mrs. Teasdale entered quietly, her face pale with pity. "My lord," she said, bowing slightly, "shall I bring your breakfast here?" He shook his head. "No." His voice sounded foreign to him, hollow. "Tell me, when did she leave?" The housekeeper hesitated. "Before dawn. She asked for a carriage to the village and left a letter." Leonard's pulse quickened. "A letter?" Mrs. Teasdale approached the desk, her hand trembling slightly as she held out an envelope. "She asked me to give it to you only after she had gone." Leonard stared at it, his vision blurring again, not from blindness, but from something far more human. The seal was plain, the handwriting unmistakably hers, neat, graceful, steady even in sorrow. "Thank you," he murmured. When Mrs. Teasdale had gone, he broke the seal. The letter was brief, yet every line carried the weight of her heart. "My dearest Leonard, forgive me for the silence I could not bear to break in person. I leave because to stay would be to wound you further. The truth you discovered was one I would have given anything to undo, but I could not rewrite the past that brought me to you. I came to Ashbourne bound by duty, but I stayed because my soul found peace in your presence. If ever you think of me, think not of the deceit that tainted our beginning, but of the hours we shared when you could not see and yet saw me best. I go with love, not regret. Be well, my lord. Find the light I could never give you." Dorothea Leonard read the words until they blurred, his hands trembling. For the first time since regaining his sight, he wished for darkness again. Darkness that could hide the shame, the longing, the realization that he had driven her away with pride. He crushed the letter to his chest, his breath shaking. "Dorothea," he whispered, her name breaking in his throat. The hours that followed were a haze of silence. He moved through the house as though in a trance, seeing everything but feeling nothing. The rooms she had touched, the parlor, the library, the garden, seemed haunted by her laughter. Every corner carried a memory, her voice reading softly by the fire, her hand steadying his, the scent of roses clinging to her skin. In the afternoon, as rain began to fall in steady sheets, Leonard made his way to the orchard. The earth was slick beneath his boots, and the branches shivered under the weight of the downpour. He stood where they had once walked together, his hand brushing the trunk of the same tree where she had described the blossoms in bloom. His vision, though clear, felt useless now. The colors, the light, the world, all of it was dim without her. He sank to one knee, the rain soaking through his coat. "I see now," he murmured, his voice breaking. "But it means nothing without you." When he returned to the house, drenched and exhausted, Mrs. Teasdale was waiting near the hearth. "My lord," she said gently, "you will catch your death if you stay out in this weather." He removed his gloves slowly, his expression distant. Perhaps that would be simpler. Her face tightened. Forgive me for speaking plainly, but self-pity does not suit you, sir. Nor would she have wished to see you so. Leonard looked up sharply. And how would you know what she wished? Mrs. Teasdale met his gaze without fear. Because she loved you. It was plain to every soul under this roof, except, it seems, to you. He froze, her words striking him harder than any blow. She did not deceive you out of greed, Mrs. Teasdale continued. She deceived you because she feared losing what had become her whole life. You may have been blind, my lord, but she never once treated you as less than a man. She gave you her care, her patience, her laughter. That is not the work of deceit. It is love. Leonard's throat tightened. Then why did she not tell me? Because pride is not the only thing that can break a heart, the housekeeper said softly. Sometimes love does it just as well. He turned away, unable to bear the truth of it. I drove her away. You can still bring her back, Mrs. Teasdale said. Leonard looked toward the window, where the rain was beginning to clear. Beyond the glass, the world shimmered with silver light. He took a deep breath. I don't even know where she's gone. I do, Mrs. Teasdale replied. She spoke of her aunt in Faircombe, near the coast, a small cottage by the cliffs. He met her eyes, hope flickering beneath the despair. Have the carriage prepared. At once. By evening, the sky began to clear, and Leonard rode out of the estate. The countryside unfolded before him in long, rolling stretches of wet fields and winding lanes. The rain had left the world shining, every leaf and blade of grass glistening in the pale light of the setting sun. He rode hard, his heart driving him forward faster than reason. Each turn of the road, each gust of wind carried the echo of her name. By the time he reached Faircombe, night had fallen. The village was small, a scatter of cottages along the cliffs, the sea roaring below in restless fury. He stopped before a modest house set apart from the others, its windows aglow with lamplight. His chest tightened at the sight. Inside, Dorothea sat by the hearth, her gown simple, her hair unadorned. She looked tired, yet there was a strange peace about her. Resignation, perhaps, or the quiet ache of acceptance. When the knock came at the door, she startled. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Her aunt, a kindly older woman, opened the door and gasped. "My lord!" Dorothea rose quickly, her hand pressing to her chest. "Leonard?" He stood in the doorway, his coat dripping with rain, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of pain and wonder. For a moment, neither moved. Then he took a single step forward. "You left," he said quietly. Dorothea's breath trembled. "I thought it was what you wanted." "What I wanted," he said, his voice rough, "was the truth. And I had it. Too late. You gave me honesty in every look, every word, every kindness, and I—" He broke off, his composure faltering. "I was too proud to see it." She shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "You have no reason to forgive me." "Then let me find one," he said, "because I cannot forgive myself if I don't." Dorothea turned away, her voice unsteady. "It was all built on a lie, Leonard. You were bought and I was sold. How can love survive such shame?" He crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate. Because it was not the contract that bound us. It was everything that came after. The night you read to me. The garden, the morning light on your face. None of that was false. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "And if you cannot trust me again?" He took her hand, his fingers trembling as they closed around hers. "Then I will learn too. You taught me to see the world when I was blind. Let me prove that I can see you clearly now." Dorothea's tears fell freely. "Leonard," he reached up, brushing one from her cheek. "Do not turn away from me again," he whispered. "You may have been sold, Dorothea, but what I feel for you was never bought. It was earned, every moment you breathed light into my life." Her resolve broke then. She let out a sob, her forehead resting against his chest. He held her tightly, the kind of embrace that mends what pride has torn apart. For a long while there were no words, only the sound of the storm fading beyond the cliffs, the slow rhythm of two hearts learning to beat in time again. When at last Dorothea looked up, Leonard cupped her face in both hands, his voice low and trembling. "I came to you blind, and you taught me to see," he said. "Now I see everything, and I choose you." Dorothea's eyes glistened, her lips parting in a breath that was half sob, half laughter. "Then you see the only truth that matters." Outside, the sea calmed, and the wind softened to a whisper. Within the small cottage, the firelight danced across their faces, two souls who had wandered through darkness and found each other again in the fragile, unwavering light of love, reborn. The sea wind had softened by morning, trading its fury for a steady hush that carried the scent of salt and wild grass through the cottage window. Dorothea stood at the small table, hands wrapped around a cup she had barely tasted, her gaze fixed on the pale light gathering beyond the glass. She had slept only in fragments, waking each time she remembered the feel of Leonard's hands on her face, the way his voice had broken when he said he chose her. Across the room, Leonard sat in a chair near the hearth, his coat folded neatly over the armrest, his shirt collar unfastened in a rare abandonment of formality. The fire had burned low in the night and was only now being coaxed back to life. He looked exhausted, and yet there was a steadiness in him Dorothea had never seen before, as if something fragile had finally become unshakable. Her aunt moved quietly about the room, careful not to intrude, but before she stepped out to tend to the kettle, she paused, eyes gentle. "My lord," she said softly, "if you mean what you said last night, you must carry it back with you. Words in a storm are easy. It's what you do when the air is calm that proves the heart." Leonard rose, his gaze following Dorothea with a clarity that made her breath catch. "You are right," he answered. "I did not ride here to speak pretty apologies. I came to bring her home." Dorothea's fingers tightened around her cup. "Home," she repeated, the word both comfort and wound. Leonard crossed the room slowly, as if he wanted every step to be chosen. He stopped close enough that the warmth of him reached her, close enough that she could see the faint shadow beneath his eyes, the strain of sleeplessness, the fierce restraint holding him together. "You are afraid," he said quietly. Dorothea's throat tightened. "I'm afraid of what the world will say." His mouth curved, not with humor, but with something like resolve. "Let the world speak until it is hoarse." She shook her head, pain flashing behind her calm. "Your cousin will not stop. He wants to destroy me, Leonard. He wants to take what you are building and turn it into scandal." Leonard's gaze sharpened. "Then he will learn what it means to challenge what is mine." Dorothea blinked at the possessive certainty in his voice. The words should have frightened her. Instead, they warmed something in her chest that had been cold for too long. "I do not want you to fight," she whispered. "I want you to be at peace." Leonard lifted his hand and hesitated only a moment before touching her cheek, his fingers steady now, no longer searching but knowing. "My peace has your name in it," he murmured, "and I will not live without it again." Dorothea's eyes shimmered. "Leonard." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, his breath a quiet tremor. "Listen to me," he said, voice low, deliberate. "You were brought into my house by an arrangement I did not understand. But what has grown between us does not belong to that arrangement. It belongs to choice. And today I will choose you where everyone can see." The simple certainty undid her. Dorothea's lashes lowered, her lips trembling, and she let herself rest her hand lightly against his chest, feeling the strong rhythm beneath. It was not an embrace, not yet, but it was an answer. When the carriage arrived, the village seemed to watch with the hush of held breath. Dorothea stepped out in a travelling cloak the colour of deep green, her bonnet tied firmly beneath her chin. She looked smaller than she had at Ashbourne, stripped of all grand trappings, but Leonard saw something else now. The pride in her posture, the courage in the set of her jaw, the softness that did not weaken her strength. He offered his arm. She took it. The ride back across the countryside was long, and the silence between them was not empty. It was filled with things that no longer needed to be hidden. The weight of their hands touching, the faint shift of Leonard's gaze as he watched her profile, the way Dorothea's breath steadied each time she felt his attention like warmth on her skin. At one point she whispered, "When you began to see, I feared the light would take you from me." Leonard's fingers tightened gently around hers. "It nearly did," he said quietly. "Not because I saw you and wanted less. Because I saw the truth and believed I did not deserve what you gave. I let pride speak louder than love." Dorothea turned her face toward him, careful, searching. "And now, he said, eyes fixed on her with painful honesty, "I would rather be humbled than alone." Ashbourne Manor rose from the landscape like a memory made solid. The orchard was in bloom, pale petals clinging to branches that swayed in a light spring wind. As the carriage rolled through the gates, Dorothea felt the old dread stir in her stomach. The house looked unchanged, but she was not the same woman who had arrived here as a bargain. Inside the front hall, Mrs. Teasdale waited with her usual composure, but her eyes glistened when she saw Dorothea beside Leonard. She dipped into a curtsy. "Welcome home, my lady." Dorothea's throat tightened. "Thank you," she managed softly. Leonard's voice was firm, carrying through the hall in a way it never had before. "Have the household assemble in the parlour within the hour, and send word to my cousin that he will attend." Mrs. Teasdale did not blink. "At once, my lord." Dorothea's heart thudded. "Leonard, what are you doing?" He turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "Ending this." The parlour filled quickly, not only with servants but with a handful of local figures who had arrived with Edmund in recent days, drawn by gossip and proximity to title. Dorothea recognized none of them personally, but she felt their eyes on her like pins through fabric. Edmund stood near the hearth, one hand lazily resting on the back of a chair, his expression pleasantly curious. Leonard entered with Dorothea at his side, and the room changed. People straightened as if they had been caught whispering in church. Even Edmund's smile faltered for a fraction of a second when Leonard's eyes fixed on him with clear, steady sight. "Well," Edmund said lightly, "this is a surprise. Cousin, I see your pilgrimage did wonders. You look restored." Leonard's voice was calm, colder than the stone walls. "I am restored in more ways than one." Edmund's gaze slid to Dorothea. "And you've brought back the runaway bride. How touching." Dorothea's hands trembled, but Leonard's arm remained firm beneath her fingers, a silent shield. Leonard stepped forward. "You delivered a letter to my breakfast table, a document meant to wound and humiliate." Edmund's brows lifted. "I delivered what the solicitor sent. If truth wounds, perhaps you should blame truth." Leonard's mouth curved slightly without warmth. "Then we will speak of truth." A hush fell. Dorothea felt her pulse in her throat. Leonard turned, looking not at Edmund but at the room. "I am Leonard Ashbourne, Marquis of Ashbourne. This is Dorothea Ashbourne, my wife. There will be no whisper in my house that she is anything other than that." A stir ran through the gathered onlookers. Dorothea's breath caught. Edmund laughed softly, bold. But declarations do not erase paperwork. Leonard's gaze returned to him, sharp as a blade. "No, but facts do. The debt that trapped Dorothea's father was purchased and transferred before my marriage." Edmund's smile thinned. And the transfer was made under your name," Leonard said evenly. The room went utterly still. Dorothea stared at Edmund, her stomach dropping. It was as if the floor had shifted beneath her. Edmund's composure held, but a faint flush rose at his collar. "You have no proof of that." Leonard lifted a folded paper from his pocket and placed it on the table nearest him. "This is proof. A receipt copied from the creditor's ledger, acquired this morning. You did not visit Oxford out of familial concern, Edmund. You visited to ensure the contract reached me at the precise moment my sight returned. You wanted my miracle to destroy me." A murmur spread. Dorothea's heart pounded so hard she feared she might sway. Edmund's voice remained smooth. but the edge of panic showed in his eyes. "How dramatic! Cousin, you sound unwell." Leonard's tone did not rise. "You did this because while I was blind and airless, you enjoyed the comfort of being next in line. A wife who might bear my child ends that comfort. A wife who might also be dismissed by scandal restores it." Dorothea's cheeks burned, not with shame now, but with fury. Her fingers tightened on Leonard's arm. Edmund's jaw tightened. "You accuse me without—" Leonard interrupted, voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "You accuse my wife by implication every time you open your mouth. You insinuated she used me. You tried to make me doubt the only person who did not treat me like a ruined thing." He turned his head slightly toward Dorothea, and the tenderness in his eyes cut through the room like sunlight. "When I was blind, she gave me dignity. When I began to see, she gave me truth, even when it meant losing me." Dorothea's throat ached. She wanted to speak, but the words would not come. Leonard faced the room again. "If any of you came here for spectacle, you may leave with disappointment. There will be no annulment. There will be no quiet dismissal. There will be no secret shame carried by my wife." Edmund's smile returned, brittle. "So you will keep her, even knowing she was sold into your arms?" Leonard's eyes flashed. Dorothea felt his grip tighten, then steady. "She was sold by a man who should never have had the right to bargain with her life," Leonard said. "But she was not sold by her own heart. And neither was I. I choose her. I choose her with my eyes open, with my name, with my title, with every consequence." The room held its breath. Dorothea finally found her voice, quiet but clear. "And I choose him," she said, her gaze fixed on Edmund without fear. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I have learned what honor looks like when it is stripped of comfort." Edmund's face hardened. "This is sentimental theatre." Leonard's voice dropped. "No, this is dismissal. Pack your things. You will leave Ashbourne by noon tomorrow. If you resist, I will pursue charges for interference and coercion. Your name will not be protected by mine." Edmund stared, stunned for the first time. "You would ruin your own blood for her?" Leonard took Dorothea's hand fully then, lacing his fingers with hers in front of everyone. The gesture was not merely intimate. It was a vow made visible. "I would ruin any man," Leonard said quietly, "who tries to make her feel bought." Edmund's mouth opened, then closed. He bowed stiffly, pride shaking beneath the motion. "As you wish, cousin." He left the room with a sharp turn, the echo of his steps fading into the corridor like a receding threat. Silence lingered, thick and stunned. Then one by one, the guests began to withdraw, their faces pale, their eyes averted. The servants remained, watching with something close to awe. Leonard exhaled slowly. Without the room full of eyes, his composure faltered for a moment. Dorothea felt it in the slight tremble of his hand. Mrs. Teasdale stepped forward, her voice gentle. "My lord, my lady, shall I see to the household?" Leonard nodded once. "Yes. And Mrs. Teasdale?" "Thank you." The housekeeper's eyes softened. "It is what she deserved, my lord, and what you did as well." When the room was empty, Leonard turned to Dorothea, the fierceness in him giving way to something raw and trembling. "Are you angry with me?" he asked quietly. Dorothea blinked, startled. "Angry? For the pain," he murmured. "For the doubt. For making you run." Dorothea lifted her free hand and touched his cheek, slow and sure. He leaned into her touch as if it were the only place he could rest. "I am not angry," she whispered. "I am relieved and frightened." His eyes searched hers. "Of what?" "That the happiness will be taken again," she admitted, voice unsteady, "that the world will find another way to punish us for how we began." Leonard's hand rose, covering hers against his cheek. "Then we will begin again," he said, "not with paper, not with bargains, with choice, with truth." He led her through the hall, past the portraits that once felt like judgment. Today they felt like witnesses. He took her to the orchard where the blossoms swayed, pale and luminous against the sky. Petals drifted down, catching in Dorothea's hair like soft promises. Leonard stopped beneath the same tree where she had once described blossoms he could not see. He looked up now, and his breath caught at the sight of branches filled with fragile white. "So, this is what you tried to give me with words," he murmured. Dorothea's eyes shone. "Yes." He turned to her, and there was no shadow left in his gaze now, only truth, clear and devastating. "And this," he said softly, "is what the light gave me. You." Dorothea's lips trembled. "Leonard." He reached for her hands, bringing them to his chest. "I cannot change how you were brought to me," he said, voice thick with feeling. "But I can change what it means. From this moment forward, no one will ever speak of you as a debt. You are my wife because I want you to be, because the world returned, and you were in it, and I knew I would rather be blind again than lose you." Dorothea let out a quiet sob, not of grief, but of release. "I feared," she whispered, "that when you saw me you would see only the shame." Leonard shook his head, his forehead resting against hers. "I saw courage. I saw gentleness that never asked for payment. I saw a woman who held my darkness in her hands and did not drop it." Dorothea's voice broke. "And I saw a man who could have hardened into cruelty, but chose tenderness instead." The distance between them vanished, not in haste, but in inevitability. Leonard lifted one hand, brushing her hair back as if he could not bear a single strand to hide her from him. Dorothea's fingers tightened on his coat, anchoring herself in the reality of him. "I love you," Leonard said, the words quiet, as if reverence demanded softness. "And I will spend the rest of my life proving that my love is not a favor. It is a vow." Dorothea's lashes lowered, tears clinging to them like dew. "Then let me prove mine," she whispered. "Not with sacrifice, with trust." Leonard's mouth hovered near her brow, his breath warm. "Stay," he murmured. "I am here," Dorothea answered, and it was not merely a promise, it was a home. The blossoms trembled above them, petals drifting down in slow, graceful spirals. The manor stood behind them, no longer a prison of quiet rules, but a house that had learned to breathe. And in the orchard, beneath the soft, steadfast light of spring, Leonard Ashbourne held Dorothea as if she were the truth he had nearly lost. And Dorothea held him as if the world could never take him away again. The orchard behind Ashbourne Manor had never looked so alive. 10 years had softened the house the way spring softened the hills, patiently, insistently, one quiet miracle at a time. The stone walls still held their age and dignity, but now laughter lived in the corridors, and sunlight moved freely through windows that had once seemed to resent the day. Even the portraits in the long gallery, those stern Ashbournes with their powdered hair and cold eyes, appeared less condemning beneath the warmth of a home that had learned to breathe again. Dorothea stood at the same orchard tree where Leonard had first truly seen her, a basket hooked over her arm. Apple blossoms drifted down like pale snow, catching in her hair. She had begun to show a few silver threads at her temples, so subtle only those who loved her would notice. They suited her. They looked like quiet triumph. Behind her, the sound of running feet broke the stillness. "Mama!" A small boy barreled through the grass, his cheeks flushed pink with effort, his curls the color of Leonard's dark hair in summer light. He was 6, too old to be carried, too young to be trusted near open gates, and he flung his arms around Dorothea's waist as if the world might steal her if he let go. "Henry," she laughed, steadying him, "you will flatten every blossom in the orchard." "I'm saving you," he declared with solemn conviction. "Saving me from what?" Dorothea asked, amused. He pointed dramatically toward the manor. "From Papa. He said he was going to steal you." Dorothea's smile softened into something deeper, something that still surprised her, even after all these years. "Did he?" Henry nodded fiercely. "He said he does it every day." Dorothea's throat tightened with the sweetness of it. She crouched to smooth her son's hair. "Then perhaps you should let him. It is a habit I rather like." A second set of footsteps approached, lighter, more measured. "Mama," came a gentler voice. Dorothea turned and saw her daughter, 8 years old, serious-eyed, composed in a way that made Dorothea's heart ache with recognition. Little Dorothea Ashbourne had Leonard's posture and Dorothea's steady gaze, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers as if it were a duty and an offering. "I picked these for the table," the girl said quietly. "Mrs. Teasdale said you would forget again." Dorothea pretended to be offended. "Would I?" Her daughter raised an eyebrow in a gesture entirely Leonard's. "Yes, because you always forget when you're thinking about Papa." Dorothea laughed, soft, helpless, delighted. "Do I?" "You do," the girl said, entirely unamused. And yet the corner of her mouth quivered with suppressed affection. Dorothea took the flowers and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Then you must keep me honest." "I do," the girl replied, as though that was simply her place in the world. A voice behind them, low and warm, turned the orchard air into something tender. "She keeps everyone honest," Leonard said. Dorothea rose slowly, as if her heart still needed a moment to adjust to the sight of him. 10 years had refined him, not softened him. He looked stronger now, more grounded, his presence less like a storm contained and more like a quiet authority that did not need to prove itself. His sight had returned fully in the years after the miracle began, though he sometimes said the most important part had never been his eyes, it had been the courage to see. Leonard wore a dark coat, open at the collar, and he carried a small wooden carving in one hand, something Henry had insisted on giving him. He stepped into the grass and looked at Dorothea as if he still remembered what it felt like to be blind. As if every time he found her in the light, he was astonished all over again. Dorothea's fingers tightened slightly around the basket. "I heard there is a thief in the orchard," she said, her voice gentle with teasing. Leonard's mouth curved. "A terrible one. He steals the same woman repeatedly, and she never seems to call for help." Henry gasped, scandalized. "Mama said it's fine." Leonard looked down at his son with grave seriousness. "Did she?" Henry nodded. "She said it's a habit she likes." Leonard lifted his eyes to Dorothea, and something passed between them, quiet, intimate, as familiar as breath. "Then I suppose I have permission," he murmured. Their daughter stepped forward, exasperated. "Must you flirt in front of us? It is embarrassing." Leonard's brow rose. "Embarrassing?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Henry will begin doing it too." Henry brightened instantly. "I will!" Dorothea laughed, the sound warm and full. Leonard's gaze lingered on her face for a long moment, and Dorothea felt, like she always did, that he was not only looking at her, he was remembering. The day moved gently forward, like a story told by the hearth. The manor kitchen had been filled with the scent of bread and herbs since sunrise. The staff prepared for the small spring gathering Dorothea held each year. It had begun as a quiet tradition, an excuse to bring the village together without the stiffness of formal charity. Over time, it had become something else, a symbol. Ashbourne Manor, once closed and silent, now opened its gates each spring. Dorothea's women's circle, as some called it, had grown from a handful of village wives to a network of seamstresses and young girls learning a trade. Leonard had funded it without hesitation, but it had been Dorothea's hands that made it real. The lessons, the conversations, the quiet insistence that dignity was not a privilege reserved for birth. Society had begun to shift in those 10 years, in ways no one had predicted, not because the world suddenly became kind, but because change had been forced into the light, slowly, stubbornly. In London, voices rose in Parliament, talk of reform and representation, talk of labour and rights that had once been dismissed as dangerous. In the villages, even small changes felt monumental. Girls reading more, women earning small wages of their own, the poor less easily erased by silence. Ashbourne had not changed England, but it had changed its corner of it, and that mattered. After the spring gathering, when the last villagers had gone and the manor settled into the hush of twilight, Dorothea wandered into the long gallery. It had once felt like a corridor of judgment. Now it felt like memory, alive, tender, occasionally painful, but no longer cold. Leonard found her there as he always did. "You disappear when you grow thoughtful," he said quietly, stepping into the lamplight. Dorothea turned, smiling. "So do you." He approached slowly, eyes fixed on her. "Not anymore," he murmured. "Not when I know what it costs to let silence grow too large." Dorothea's expression softened. "Sometimes I still hear it," she confessed. "That old silence, the one that used to live in these walls." Leonard's gaze darkened with remembrance. "I used to think silence was protection," he said. "Now I know it can be cruelty when it is chosen out of fear." Dorothea swallowed, emotion tightening her throat. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "The way we began?" Leonard did not answer at once. He reached for her hand instead, turning it in his, thumb brushing over her knuckles with familiarity that still felt reverent. "I regret that you cried alone," he said finally, voice low. "I regret the night you left. I regret every moment pride made me blind again." Dorothea's eyes glistened. "And what do you not regret?" His gaze lifted to her face, steady and certain. "You," he said, "never you." Her breath caught. Even after 10 years, the simplicity of his devotion could undo her. Dorothea stepped closer, resting her forehead lightly against his chest. "Sometimes I wonder," she whispered, "if I would have survived without you." Leonard's arms tightened around her. "You would have survived," he murmured into her hair. "But you would have been alone. And I—" his voice caught. "I would have become a man I would not recognize." Dorothea looked up, searching his face. "You did pay a price, Leonard." His jaw tightened slightly, as if he could still taste the bitterness. Edmund made sure of it. Edmund Ashbourne had not gone quietly. The scandal Leonard threatened had been enough to force him out of the county, but pride had driven him to gamble with his last allies. He had tried to challenge Leonard's authority, tried to cast doubt on Dorothea's standing with letters and whispered stories. In the end, his own duplicity undid him. Evidence of his debts and manipulations surfaced. Society in London, so eager for spectacle, turned on him like a hungry animal. He lost his inheritance, his reputation, and the very circles he had once used as weapons. He had left England for the continent, a man still alive but exiled by his own choices. Leonard did not speak of him often, not because he forgave him entirely, but because Edmund no longer held power over their story. Dorothea's fingers tightened on Leonard's lapel. "Do you ever feel guilty?" she asked quietly. Leonard's eyes held hers, unwavering. "No," he said. "He chose cruelty. The price was always coming." Dorothea nodded slowly. "Then that chapter is closed." Leonard's thumb traced the edge of her hand. "All chapters are closed," he said softly. "Except the one we write every day." The moon rose over the manor, pale and steady. Outside, the orchard shimmered faintly, blossoms glowing like scattered stars in the dark. Dorothea and Leonard stepped onto the terrace, drawn as always toward the place that had held their turning point. Henry and their daughter had fallen asleep hours ago. The boy with his wooden horse clutched to his chest, the girl with a book open on her pillow. The house was quiet now, but it was not the old silence of despair. It was the silence of peace. Dorothea leaned into Leonard's side, her head resting against his shoulder. "Do you remember," she whispered, "the first time you felt the sunlight differently?" Leonard's lips brushed her hair. "I remember the first time I felt it because you were near," he murmured. "I thought it was the sun. It was you." Dorothea let out a soft laugh that sounded dangerously like a sob. "And do you remember the first time you saw my face?" Leonard turned his head, looking at her as if he were seeing her again for the first time. "I remember thinking," he said quietly, "that if the world took my sight again, I could endure it, because I had already seen you." Dorothea's eyes filled. "And now?" Leonard's hand lifted, brushing her cheek the way he had done that first night of certainty. "Now I see you every day," he whispered, "and I still feel unworthy. But I no longer run from the feeling. I stand in it. I live in it. Dorothea's lips trembled. 10 years, she breathed, and it still feels like the beginning. Leonard's voice lowered, rich with tenderness. Because love doesn't fade when it's built on truth, he murmured. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, deeper. It becomes home. Dorothea turned in his arms, facing him fully. The moonlight painted his features in silver, softening the strength of his jaw, catching in his eyes. She looked up at him, and the years fell away. She saw again the wounded man by the fire, the lonely Marquis at the window, the trembling hands that had reached for her in darkness. "I was afraid," she whispered. "That time would take you from me, not with death, with distance." Leonard's gaze held hers, unwavering. "Time tried," he said softly, "but it had no claim. You were mine by choice, by love." Dorothea's hands rose to his face, fingers gentle, remembering. "And you were mine," she whispered, "the moment you asked me not to pity you." Leonard's breath shook. "Dorothea." She smiled through her tears. "We survived," she whispered. "We survived everything that tried to make us ashamed." Leonard's voice broke, just slightly. "Because you taught me the greatest lesson of my life," he murmured, "that a man can be blind with open eyes and see with a wounded heart." Dorothea leaned up, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Not a gesture of passion, but of reverence, the kind of love that held history in its hands and did not flinch. Behind them, the manor stood quiet and warm, filled with sleeping children and the promise of another spring. Ahead, the orchard whispered softly in the night breeze, blossoms falling like gentle reminders that beauty returns again and again, even after harsh winters. Dorothea rested her head against Leonard's chest, listening to the steady rhythm that had once been storm and now was sanctuary. "I love you," she whispered, simple and certain. Leonard's arms tightened around her, as if he could protect her from time itself. "And I," he murmured, voice thick with devotion, "will spend the rest of my life choosing you, until the last light fades, and even beyond it." In the orchard, a petal drifted down and landed on the stone terrace between them, small, pale, perfect, a quiet, final blessing. And in the calm that followed, Dorothea understood something she had never dared to believe at the beginning. Love had not merely survived the passing years, it had become their legacy. What Dorothea and Leonard lived through is the kind of love story that doesn't begin with perfect conditions. It begins with imperfect people, wounded pride, and a world that tries to reduce hearts to contracts. And yet, this is exactly where the most powerful lesson is born. Your origin does not get the final word. A cruel beginning doesn't have to decide a beautiful ending. Dorothea was sold, but she refused to become an object. She chose dignity, even when it cost her comfort. Leonard was blind, but the greatest blindness he overcame wasn't in his eyes. It was in the fear that told him he didn't deserve love. Together, they proved something timeless. When someone loves you with truth, it doesn't erase your scars. It teaches you how to carry them with pride. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt ashamed of where you come from, of what you've endured, or of how you had to survive, remember Ashbourne Manor. Remember the orchard. Remember that love can begin in shadow and still become light. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to run, but to stay, to choose, to forgive, to rebuild. Now I want to hear from you. What moment stayed in your heart the most? Was it the first time Leonard truly saw Dorothea, the quiet tenderness of the orchard, or the moment he chose her in front of everyone, with his eyes open and his pride finally quiet? And if you made it all the way to the end, leave the word orchard in the comments. Not just to prove you were here, but because that orchard became a symbol of everything they overcame, where love grew back, blossom by blossom, after the coldest winter. I'll be reading your comments, and seeing that word lets me know who stayed until the final light. If you'd like to support the team that makes these stories possible, You can send a super thanks on YouTube with whatever amount you can or want. Truly, any contribution helps us keep bringing you these emotional, cinematic romances. And if that's not possible right now, you can still help in a powerful way. Share this story with someone who loves period dramas, village romances, and slow burn love that heals. Your share keeps the channel alive more than you can imagine. And before you go, don't forget to check the other narrations I'm leaving in the cards. If you loved this one, there are more stories waiting to make your heart race, sigh, and believe again. Thank you for staying until the end, and for carrying this love story with you.